listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
A right royal row is raging. How's that for alliteration? I must have been back in Scotland this weekend. I was, indeed. More of that later. But this right royal row that's raging is over a book written by a tabloid journalist, but really just the retelling of tabloid journalist stories about the plight of poor Harry and Meghan. Who are you with? I'm with Wills and Kate myself, although you'll be able to vote for the abolition of the monarchy. Hold up in Beverly Hills. They're finding freedom, or is it a license to print money? My money is on the latter. Speaking of tabloid journalism, there's going to be a lot of it because the judge has unsealed the Ghislaine Maxwell tapes, and I promise you that is a dripping roast of sex and scandal and maybe a bit of spying, allegedly. And speaking of America, we'll be talking about Donald Trump, who's actually increasingly unhinged, but has apparently managed to halt the flow of his support down the drain. We'll be talking about country and Western music. Who'd have thunk it? Here on the mother of all talk shows, but it's country and Western with a difference. And of course, who can ignore the coronavirus, which continues to cut people down all over the world. Even in Spain, where the government encouraged you to go on holiday just a couple of weeks ago. Now, unless you were back by midnight last night, you are in quarantine. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this is London. Coming to you, of course, all over the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. We're on FM 105.5 FM in the Washington, D.C. area, and on AM from Burning City to Burning City, right across the United States of America. And, of course, you can hear us worldwide on SputnikNews.com. But well over 500,000 of you last week actually watched rather than merely listened. And they did so mainly on Facebook, either on my Facebook page or on RT's multiple Facebook pages. If you are one of those hundreds of thousands of people, then please share with all of your contacts on Facebook. You can also watch on YouTube, either on my own page, my own channel, or on RT's multiple channels on YouTube. You can watch even on Twitter and, for the time being, on Instagram. However you're watching, however you are listening, this is the Open University of the Airwaves, a global university where there are no tuition fees and where the teacher encourages you to speak back. You can call. Indeed, I hope you do. We had a magic call last week from someone who thought that an independent Scotland could quantitatively ease the Bank of England's pound notes. That's the level of economic incompetence and illiteracy and numeracy among Scottish nationalists. More of that later. Actually, we had Paul just the other week who thought the same thing. Last week was that an independent Scotland could negotiate a free trade agreement with China. Forgetting that an independent Scotland intends to be a member of the EU and therefore not entitled to make free trade agreements with anyone. Again, as I say, more of that later. You can call or you can tweet. Now, a right royal row is raging, as I said, following the publication or the serialization, at least the Daily Mail has, I'm told, 10 separate articles on it today. A book called Finding Freedom. It's really a book written by Harry and Meghan, although it's ghostwritten by a tabloid journalist. But it is everything that Harry and Meghan would like to say in their own name and on the record if they had the guts to do so. But they don't, of course, because they intend to continue to collect by one means or another. Are they looking for freedom in Los Angeles? A funny place to look, if you ask me, in Donald Trump's America. Or is it just a license to print money? We've got a poll now raging on it. In the royal row, who's in the right? A, William and Kate. B, Harry and Meghan. C, abolish the monarchy. My vote is with A, but you are fully entitled to vote as you please. And of course, the tabloids just can't wait to get their teeth into the unsealed indictments. Unsealed. All the dirty details tabled by a woman who says that she was raped, for that's what it would be, by Prince Andrew. And Ghislaine Maxwell, whose lawyers tried vainly to stop this being unsealed, have failed. And her suicide next week is very, very sad, but nonetheless, we will discuss it this evening. Because the Epstein case and the Ghislaine Maxwell angle is not just a great Anglo-American story. It's not just the most sordid, wicked, evil, sexual, criminal matter. It is almost certainly a matter of espionage. It's sex, lies, and spying. And that's now all going to tumble out into the open as Ghislaine Maxwell eats her porridge in jail, having failed to get bail, and now must wait until next summer, before facing trial, facing her accusers that she did so much to avoid facing in her scamper around the United States, or who knows, maybe even farther afield. And talking about America, we can't ignore Donald J. Trump. It's getting close, very close, to the November presidential election. Joe Biden still producing his basement tapes, although they seem to hit a lower base every time he talks. He claimed this week in one of the most embarrassing tapes, it's actually hard to put them in a league table, but I thought it was one of the most embarrassing, when he claimed that nurses in the Walter Reed Hospital, when he was ill, were breathing up his nostrils. Yes, literally, blowing up his nostrils to get him going. Now, he may have been in some kind of fever. This may be a hallucination, but the next president would be of the United States actually claimed that to the whole country on tape this week. He said that the nurses used to bend down and whisper in his ear. I think they were whispering, "Don't run for president, Joe. There's far too much in the cupboard, too many skeletons in the cupboard for you." So, as I've said before, Donald Trump versus Joe Biden says more or less it all about the current state of the United States of America. But that is the choice. Jesse Ventura is not running. So who are you with, Joe Biden or Donald Trump? Maybe that's what the second poll of the evening should be. The coronavirus, of course, is devastating everywhere. The United States, of course, far and away, the worst hit, the worst affected, and turning in the worst governmental performance anywhere in the world. 25% of all cases in the world are in the United States of America. In fact, if Florida was a state, then Florida would be one of the most afflicted countries in the world. But it's in Texas, it's in Arizona, it's in California. It was earlier devastating. New York State, particularly New York City. And Donald Trump is potentially going to be swept out of office not for anything else that he did, not for anything else that he said, but because of the failure to halt this sweep of death, this grim reaper that is cutting its way through his country. Not that Britain is any better. Britain is second worst after the United States, although there are some statistical arguments about that. And there's also a lot of damned lies. The Scottish government of Nicola Sturgeon long claimed that the English COVID-19 was 5 times worse than the Scottish. And a lot of daft liberals here in England believed her. But it turns out that too is a statistical misinterpretation. And in fact, Scotland has the 3rd worst death rate per head of population, and taking density of population into account, in the whole world. So those Egypts that were shouting at me at the border, get back to England, the vigilante squad, they were doing so on an entirely fake basis. But of course, we've got the winter still to come. And I happen to be one of those that believes that the winter spike in COVID-19 is going to be very considerable indeed, and may last well past Christmas, well into 2021. We'll ask our Moats medic, Dr. Ranjeet Brar, all about that later. Now, what do you get if you play a country and western record backwards? You get your wife back, your house back, your dog back, all the things that you have lost in the course of a country and western record if you play it the right way round. Now, country and western's not my bag, but it appears to be the bag of our editor, Mr. Ron Mackay, because he has turned up the only politically progressive country and western singer anywhere in the United States of America, from Texas, no less. He's concerned about COVID-19. He's even concerned about Black Lives Matter. And that must go down a storm on the country and western circuit. We'll be talking to Todd Barrow later. But first of all, we'll be talking to Ben Norton. Now, Ben Norton is the associate editor of the Grey Zone. He's a journalist extraordinaire. I've now spoken to him many times and have always been impressed. There's nobody better that we could have brought for you to kick us off in the mother of all talk shows on All Matters Americana. How's that poll going? William and Kate, 39%. Harry and Meghan toiling at 13%. And Abolish the Monarchy in a decent lead, 48%. And, you know, I'm not a royalist, of course, but the idea of President Tony Blair haunts me. I'd kind of prefer a head of state that wasn't a superannuated politician. But there you go. In the royal row, who's in the right? A, William and Kate, 39. B, Harry and Meghan, 13. C, Abolish the Monarchy, 48. Now, 418 people have voted already, and it's only less than quarter past. So get busy. It's on my Twitter feed. Cast your vote. Now, the telephone number. If you are calling from the United Kingdom, it's 02077 982 255. That's 02077 982 255. If you're calling us from the US, it's 001 757 744 4480. Or you can tweet us, of course, at George Galloway, at RTUK News, preferably both of us. Let's take a 60-second break before Ben Norton.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
From the makers of Where's the WMD? Who killed Epstein and pinned the blame on the Democratic donkey? Comes the brand new game, Where's Biden Hiding? Play the tapes. Figure out what the hell he's trying to say.
It is me, Joe Biden.
Try and find Where's Biden Hiding? Where's Biden Hiding? we can't find him. This product is fictional and is not available in your local burn-down store. But seriously, if anyone finds him, please let us know.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, would you breathe up Joe Biden's nostrils? Well, you'd be ill-advised, especially if you were a young girl, and I mean a really young girl. But that's what he claimed on tape in one of the basement tapes released this week, that the nurses would bend down and whisper in his ear. No doubt he was aching to stroke their hair because that's what he does. He said they went home and brought him pillows. There were presumably not enough pillows in the Walter Reed Military Hospital, Veterans Hospital, even for a man as exalted as he. And, as I say, they breathed up his nostrils. I don't know if they lived to tell the tale. Perhaps Ben Norton does. He is the assistant editor of The Grey Zone, and I hope he joins me now. Ben, thank you very much indeed for coming back on the mother of all talk shows. Let's start with that extraordinary story first, can we? I thought I'd seen and heard it all with Joe Biden, but the image of nurses breathing up his nostrils quite did it for me this week. Well, how's that gone down in the United States?
Well, it's very clear that Joe Biden is in poor health. He's 77 years old and he hasn't even entered office yet. And especially, we're not even just talking about his physical health, his psychic health, his mental health, his psychological health is absolutely awful. He can barely give a speech without having horrific faux pas. He recounts strange stories about touching the hair on children's legs. I kid you not, that's a real story that he told. And he also just can't put sentences together. And, of course, Trump also has his share of faux pas. He has his very strange speaking tactics. But it's incredible because the Democratic Party is portraying itself as this great resistance to Trump, and they're going to solve all of these massive problems facing the U.S. And yet they present a candidate who is in many ways a kind of carbon copy of Trump. He's the kind of Democratic Party version of Trump. I mean, except he lacks the charisma, but he has the same right-wing policies. He has the same mental health problems and same physical health problems.
It is extraordinary, but is it a coincidence? I mean, is this what the United States empire has come to? Joe Biden versus Donald Trump? And if so, what does that tell us?
Yeah, I do think George, I think it's a pretty fitting kind of indictment of the state of the U.S. empire right now, which is very clearly in decline. Everyone around the world sees that. Washington is lashing out and threatening its own so-called allies, threatening Britain, France, Germany, anyone who challenges its policies with tariffs, with sanctions, with other punitive measures. And meanwhile, inside the U.S., the country is falling apart at the seams. We see brutal police violence across the country. And that's not new, of course, but everyone in the world is seeing it and it can't be denied anymore. And then right in the middle of this historic election, we're told that this is the most important election in modern history in all of our lifetimes. And yet, who are the candidates? The candidates are, of course, Trump on one side. Everyone knows how awful Trump is. But on the other side, the supposed solution that the Democratic Party has to this awful right-wing demagogue Trump is himself a right-wing neoliberal who can barely speak, as we were saying earlier. And also, by the way, let's keep in mind that both of these candidates have many scandals, have many allegations of sexual harassment and abuse. And in the case of Trump, it's clear that this is someone who's very corrupt, who is using the office to enrich himself and his family. But that's also true for Joe Biden. And we have several cases of this, but the most egregious case is, of course, his son, Hunter Biden, being given this sinecure for a Ukrainian fossil fuel company, a gas company, where he was put on the board of directors and was given nearly $100,000 per month to basically do nothing. And there are other cases of personal enrichment and corruption. So, as I said earlier, I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that in many ways, Joe Biden is kind of the Democratic Party's version of Trump. He doesn't use the same kind of openly racist rhetoric, but at the end of the day, their policies are very similar.
Well, he may not use openly racist rhetoric, but he put a lot more black men in jail than Donald Trump did.
That's exactly right. Joe Biden is one of the architects of mass incarceration, and he used to brag about it. So it's actually been incredible to see the kind of post-neoliberal era we're living in, where zombie neoliberalism, if you will, where everyone recognizes that this neoliberal model that Ronald Reagan, well, of course, Pinochet first imposed through a brutal military dictatorship in Chile, thanks to the CIA. But of course, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher said, in the words of Thatcher, there is no alternative. And we've been living through that for decades. But now we're in this kind of zombie neoliberal era. Everyone knows that the system has failed. But instead of presenting an actual alternative on the left, of course, the Labour Party in the UK, as you all saw, destroyed the alternative of Corbynism. The Democratic Party destroyed the alternative of Bernie Sanders. And what we're left is the most right-wing one, and frankly, the most old school style of blue dog Democrat, right-wing Democrats who supported so-called tough on crime legislation, who supported bailing out Wall Street, who support tax cuts for the rich. That's what we're left with. It's actually not only more of the same, it's an intensification of those very same neoliberal policies. And unfortunately, as I've said on your show, George, and as I've repeated again and again, this is really dangerous because what the neoliberals in the Democratic Party here and now under Keir Starmer in London, what they're doing in the UK is they're actually intensifying those neoliberal policies and actually giving further rise to the far right.
Now, let's go through how bad it is in the United States. I think 30 million people have lost their jobs in the course of the coronavirus pandemic. I think, therefore, that means that roughly 100 million people have no health care cover. The people who didn't have it before, plus the people who had it with their job and have now lost their job. I think unemployment is now at a higher rate than it was in the Great Depression. Am I right?
That's absolutely right. We don't know the exact figure, and I would be skeptical of the official figures from the U.S. government because there are a lot of reasons to think that they're downplaying the actual severity of the crisis of unemployment. This is not a new problem, but in terms of the degree, it is absolutely insane. We're talking about degrees between maybe up to 30 or 40% unemployment. There was even a study that was published that showed that half of U.S. adults don't have jobs. So we're talking about tens of millions of people who want to work but can't work. And then further, another point that we need to talk about that never gets enough attention in mainstream corporate media is not only do we have tens of millions of people who have no jobs, we also have tens of millions of young people, my generation, people under 40, who are basically trapped in debt that they can never pay off. There is more than $1.4 trillion of student debt. And previously, people were barely getting by, paying the bare minimum on their school loans. And now people can't even pay those school loans at all. And what a lot of people outside the U.S. don't realize is that $1.4 trillion of student debt that young people are crushed under, that can never be forgiven. It's not like other forms of debt, like maybe medical debt. You can't write it off. It follows you to your grave. So we already had a major economic crisis. There's also another growing bubble of real estate. And I think it's all going to explode pretty soon, unfortunately. And it's going to be further compounded by this horrific economic crisis caused by coronavirus, which also, let's not forget, we're talking about nearly 150,000 dead. I mean, it's difficult to imagine it being worse than the Great Depression, but I actually think we are living in a moment that is just as bad, if not worse, than the Great Depression.
Now, tell us about the law and order situation. Some of us have been to Portland, saw it as a very peaceful and lovely place. Oregon's not a state that you identify with bad things. And yet we're looking at quite extraordinary pictures from Oregon, from Portland.
That's exactly right. It's actually quite terrifying. Again, I should stress that this is not necessarily just something that began with Trump. To really understand the situation, we have to go back to George Bush Jr., who after 9/11 pushed through this horrific authoritarian legislation, the Patriot Act, which also created later the Department of Homeland Security. And this has ballooned into this monstrosity that is larger than almost all other institutions, and it's larger than most police forces. And Trump is now using DHS and Border Patrol and ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He's using these federal agencies that mostly work on the border as his personal Praetorian Guard to go after protesters, and in some cases violating the actual local laws and the state sovereignty of numerous states. You mentioned Portland. This is an area with a progressive government. They're not great, of course, I'm saying, but they have a progressive government, and the federal government under Trump and under the DOJ is violating those state rights and sending in federal forces, which are not only brutalizing protesters. There have been videos going viral on social media showing protesters being detained by federal forces who do not have badges on and are being thrown into unmarked cars. This is the kind of things that happen in dictatorships. These are the kinds of things that actually the CIA supported in the military dictatorships in South America during the Cold War, in Argentina, where they disappeared tens of thousands of leftists. Now they're using those same policies against left-wing anti-establishment protesters who are protesting against systemic racism, structural violence, unemployment, all of these problems that we're talking about. And again, we need to understand that these are federal forces that are doing it. And in some cases, they're working with local police, or in some cases, they're actually going against the own local police and are just doing what Trump's DOJ tells them to do.
Now, almost unbelievably, given all that you have just said, the United States is now maintaining sanctions or embargoes against 39 different countries with a combined population of 2 billion. That's 1 in 4 people in the entire world is currently under sanction by the United States of America. Its forces are off the coast of Venezuela, off the coast of Iran, all around Russia, and in the South China Sea, on the water and in the air above it. This all sounds insane, Ben.
Absolutely. It's what historians will call imperial overreach. At this time of crisis, well, things are falling apart. The U.S. empire just keeps extending it and keeps pushing out its power, and it's suicidal. And it's terrifying to me because the U.S. is really pushing the world toward a new world war. Mike Pompeo, who is a really kind of cartoon villain, this guy is so Orwellian. He just believes so much in using military force everywhere and threatening every country on earth. He's threatening the International Criminal Court. He's threatening the family members of International Criminal Court judges. And Mike Pompeo just gave a historic speech this past week, essentially declaring a new Cold War on China. Of course, this is a policy that's been going on for many years now, but he confirmed it, saying that the U.S. goal is to overthrow the Communist Party of China and the government of China. And now we saw that Australia joined the U.S. and Japan this past week in doing military exercises in the South China Sea off the coast of China, threatening China. The U.S. has spy planes threatening China. Of course, you mentioned the suffocating blockade in Venezuela, which is killing thousands of people. There's the 60-year blockade of Cuba. I mean, there's just so many crimes going on. And although, of course, I think this is a very bad thing, what it's also doing in many ways, actually, is uniting other countries in the world. Of course, unfortunately, we've seen many countries in Europe surrender their sovereignty. On the case of China, we saw that the UK has shamefully is going to push out Huawei, and China's response is that the UK has abandoned its sovereignty on the issue of China. We've seen that in other European countries. But at the same time, I think in parts of Latin America and other parts of Asia and Africa, we're actually seeing a growing unity between forces that don't want to be colonized by the U.S. And of course, we've seen Russia and China growing together. So I think what this is doing is, yes, the U.S. unfortunately is pushing the world toward more war, but at the same time, it's also accelerating its own imperial decline.
And of course, these sanctions are now, as you said earlier, not just against kind of obvious and traditional U.S. enemies. They are sanctions against their own friends and allies, including Britain. Sanctions on Scotch whisky, believe it or not. But the Germans in particular, and Denmark, have pushed back. Now, the US demanded that they halt the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to bring Russian gas to keep the lights on and the heat going in Europe. The US demanded that they cease and desist and buy American shale oil instead, but the Europeans said no thanks. There must come a point when a country in such crisis as the United States finds that its currency is no longer reliable. It's devaluing, by the way, by the day. The currency is no longer acceptable as king of the currencies, and the diktat from Washington will no longer be obeyed.
That's exactly right, George. Since the end of World War II and the creation of the Bretton Woods system, the United States dollar has really been the kind of de facto global currency. And the U.S. has used wars, its war machine, to make sure that the supremacy of the dollar is never challenged. But right now, with Venezuela in the past several years, we've seen Venezuela start listing its oil in the Chinese yuan. We've seen it try to do business with a basket of currencies in the euro. And we've seen other countries. Iran is trying to do business in other currencies. And the U.S. is, by overextending its imperial power, is actually weakening itself. And the U.S. dollar is the most important weapon that the U.S. empire has, because without the power of the dollar, all it has is the military. And the military force is so blunt that everyone in the world can see it. No one can deny it. And the U.S. can't even win a war anyway. So I think what's really terrifying is that as we see this extreme systemic crisis in the United States, and we see people like Mike Pompeo, who I need to stress are absolute fanatics, who, when you compound it with the fact they're also apocalyptic evangelical Christians who think that we're the last generation of humans on Earth, I think they really do want a new global war. And they think that the only way to maintain their supremacy is through that military force, and they're willing to use it. So I think that we should be very careful going forward. And when I say we, I mean people around the world who want peace, who don't want to see another world war, because the U.S. is pushing the rest of the planet toward world war. And this is not a reciprocal relationship here. The U.S. is very clearly the aggressor, and the entire world can see that. And unfortunately, I think the only people who can really hold back the government and stop it from carrying out all of these crimes are those of us Americans, people in the U.S. We really need to hold our government to account. We need to rebuild the anti-war movement. We need to build a movement that is not beholden to corporate interests, not beholden to people like Joe Biden, and say enough is enough. We actually want peace and diplomacy with the world and not another world war.
Last question. I'm grateful for your time, and I hate to put you on the spot. But with, just a few months, 4 months or so to go, who do you think is going to be elected in November?
It's a really difficult question, George. I don't know. I mean, unfortunately, in my gut, I think Trump will win again, because Biden just doesn't offer anything to anyone. In fact, Biden gave speeches, of course, they were private speeches to some of his rich corporate donors on Wall Street, in which he promised, and this is an exact quote, I'm not exaggerating, he said nothing fundamentally would change. And that's the exact opposite of what we need. We need a candidate who will radically transform society. And unfortunately, the Democratic Party will never tolerate that. Well, rather, their corporate donors will never tolerate that. So while a lot of people are being optimistic, saying that Trump is really low in the polls, unfortunately, let's not forget those same polls the same pollsters said back in the 2016 election that Hillary Clinton had a 97% chance of winning. And of course, we saw what happened. So unfortunately, I don't want to be pessimistic, but I see I see little hope of changing inside electoral politics, which is why we need to push the system from the outside. And that's why we need more people in the streets protesting.
Ben Norton, many thanks for coming on board, the mother of all talk shows. Now, in the royal row, who's in the right? William and Kate, 38%, down 1. Harry and Meghan, 11%, down 2. Abolish the monarchy, 51%, up 3. Well, at least give us a referendum, surely. You're not just going to abolish it by fiat, surely. You can vote now on my Twitter feed. 895 votes so far. Now, another week, another attack on RT. This time from the Labour Party, going full Jolly George in the 1920 British invasion. Yes, let me say that to you again. In the 1920 British invasion of Russia, the British Labour movement halted it in its tracks, at least for a little while, when the dock workers refused to load ships like the Jolly George, which was headed to Russia with weapons and with soldiers. The dockers refused to allow the ship to be loaded. The Labour movement were fully behind the campaign to save Russia. Hands off Russia, they said. But this week, in the House of Commons, it was Labour that was demanding that the Conservative government close down RT. Now, of course, in 2020, as opposed to 1920, closing down television stations is actually impossible because we'll keep on broadcasting whatever Keir Starmer likes or doesn't, and whatever Boris Johnson decides or doesn't decide to do. But the main problem with Keir Starmer's demand was that it is not the business of either the government or the opposition to tell the regulator, Ofcom, what to do. In fact, it was a breach, imagine, a breach of the quasi-judicial independence of Ofcom. And the silence from Ofcom probably illustrates that they are not amused at being told what to do in their day job of regulating the British media industry by a here today, gone tomorrow tailor's dummy. A man so wooden, the birds are trying to nest in him. Now, I made my short for RT this week on this very subject. Take a look. It's a funny old world, as Mrs. Thatcher once said. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has just called on the government to close RT, one of the only television networks in the country, in the world, whose audience is going up rather than down. The proximate cause was the Russia report, which was delayed for almost a whole year. And we now know the reason why. There's nothing actually in it. It doesn't even qualify as idle gossip. As Andrew Neil, the anti-Russia hawk BBC guru, put it, the problem with the press conference accompanying the report was that the government could or would give not a single example of Russian interference in British elections, neither in the referenda in Scotland in 2014 and across the UK as a whole on Brexit in 2016. Not a scintilla of evidence, just open-sourced reports, which means anything that anybody ever wrote and that is extant on the internet. We've got 7 intelligence services in Britain with a budget of many billions of pounds. If President Putin was really standing in the Kremlin, working out how he could affect the outcome in British electoral matters, you'd think one of those intelligence services would be able to produce one sliver of evidence, but evidence there was none. The implied point is that Russia wanted Scotland to vote for separatism. That's kind of knocked on the head by the fact that I, as the biggest opponent of separatism in Scotland, appear on the network more often, literally, than anybody else in the world. 7 days a week, plus this broadcast, I'm on RT. Yeah, I'm never done hammering Scottish nationalism. Funny that. But the big enchilada was the search to find some evidence that some voter in Sunderland or in Swansea voted for Brexit because President Vladimir Putin told him to. Now, that's not just an insult to the voters themselves. It's an insult to your intelligence. People voted for Brexit for all kinds of reasons. But the fact that Putin wanted them to definitely wasn't one of them. There is one other reason why the Conservative government suppressed this Russia report beyond the general election of last December. It's not just that there's next to nothing in it, it's that what is in it shows that the party most penetrated by Russian oligarchs is the Conservative Party and Boris Johnson's circle themselves. These oligarchs are hiding out in London, as far away from President Putin and the Kremlin as they can possibly get. They're counting their ill-gotten gains here, washing them in the laundromat of the City of London. So there may be Russian actors in British politics, but they're not from the Kremlin. They are fugitives from the Kremlin in many cases. This is all look over there material. The COVID-19 catastrophe in Britain, with one of the worst death rates in the entire world, foreshadows an economic crisis, the mother of all economic crises, the biggest crisis since the 1930s, and maybe even worse than that one. The call by Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, to ban RT is not just a strike at freedom of speech. It's not just a strike at the values that the British like to say they stand for. It is an attempt to suppress alternative takes on events, which has drawn more and more and more people towards RT over the last few years. It will not succeed. RT will continue, whether Keir Starmer likes it or not, and whatever the British government does or doesn't do. Because our motto is question more. And the more we question, the better the answers we'll get.
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
Feel free to disagree. The British number is 02077 982 255 and the US number 001 744 4480. Or let us know on Twitter at George Galloway, at RT UK News. Now, this is a sad announcement. This was tweeted from Jane Ackroyd's account on YouTube. She commented on every Moats post every Sunday with her opinion. And it's from her husband. It says, "Dear George, sadly, Jane passed away 2 weeks ago after a short illness. Thanks for the hours of pleasure your shows gave her over the years. Thank you again." From Patrick, her husband of 28 years. I'm so sorry for your loss, Patrick. May God rest her soul and give you the strength to bear your loss. Very, very sad to hear that. Now, Joan says on Twitter, the UK has nothing left, only the monarchy, to attract tourists. We're sinking fast, so they may as well sink with the rest of the country. And in Facebook, Roy says, Ben Norton, one of the few Americans that talk sense. And Calaman says, it's the BBC that should be closed down. And Lee says, George, you can't say Trump isn't going to win because of the polls. The same poll said Hillary had a 98% chance of beating Trump. And David says it's incredible to think that Peter Sellers' 1979 film, Being There, about a simpleton becoming US president, has happened several times since and is about to happen again. Now, I loved Peter Sellers very much, and I think Being There was by far and away his greatest film. If you have never seen it, you really must, because Peter Sellers is a simpleton. He's a gardener. His name is Chance the gardener. And he talks, babbles, nonsense. But some people, desperate for a political figurehead, start to wonder if he is, in fact, a sage, a soothsayer almost. And they begin to think that his nonsense is actually wisdom. And so they begin to groom him for the presidency. It is truly wonderful. And if you watch it, you must watch the outtakes after the show, at the end of the titles. The outtakes are almost as good as the film. Here's Andrew in Houston, in Ayrshire or in Texas, I think. Texas. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good afternoon to you, sir. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, my take on the monarchy, right?
Yes.
I think the monarch should be abolished. It's not relevant right now to the modern society and the world at large. You know, it's just not fair for a set of people to be born into riches while other people are out there struggling to make ends meet. And you know, you have the monarchies, you know, the kids and the great grandkids, and just, you know, I mean, it doesn't make no sense. Nobody's interested in the royal family right now, and you know, that's my take on that. It's overrated.
But mind you, Bill Clinton was the president, your head of state, and Hillary Clinton tried to be, and I've no doubt that Chelsea Clinton will try to be. George Bush was your head of state, and then his son was your head of state, and then his other son ran to become the president. I have absolutely no doubt that Donald Trump, your head of state, his daughter, his son, they'll all try to be the head of state after him. And of course, you need a head of state, Andrew. The question is, should it be someone who is politically partisan, who is interfering in the democratic life of the state, or should it be a harmless figurehead? The Queen has done no harm in Britain, I can assure you. And she's very rich, of course, because all of her antecedents were very rich. And the country pays a lot of money for the upkeep of the royal family. But there are actually people in this world much richer than her, including, of course, Jeff Bezos, the owner of so much of the world now. Andrew.
Now, what is your question? I mean, these are totally two different things. You know, Jeff Bezos worked, he had an idea. He had a $1 billion idea that he ran away with.
Trillion dollar
idea that he ran away with, and that makes him what he is today. But the royal family, I don't have to have an idea. I just have to be born in the family. I can sit in my house and just be a royal and just live a good life and thereafter. Well, you talked about Bush and Clinton and the white Hillary and all that. If you look at these people...
Well, I'm saying it's hereditary. How's the United States doing these days?
Well, U.S. is the way it is, but everybody is not happy right now with the leader we're having right now. Trump is just, nobody know how he, you know, I don't know. Nobody's happy right now. But at the end of the day, he worked for whatever he got. He didn't get anything for free. You know, he put himself out there.
Actually, that's not true. He inherited $300 million from his father.
Yeah, but again, the United States is not paying anything to support him like the British monarch. You know, the money that they are using...
Yeah, you're tempting me because that's not true either. The United States is being bent to the financial interest of the Trump family. I could talk to you about Turnberry Golf Course in Scotland and the use of Prestwick Airport nearby, with US military planes being flown there so as to keep the ability of people to arrive at Turnberry to play golf on Donald Trump's course.
I understand what you're saying right now, but I've got news for you. I think Donald Trump running for the office and being the president of this country is going to be one of his biggest mistakes ever. Because now that he's the president, a lot of people have come to see that he was corrupt and he has cheated his way through, and he has evaded taxes, and up to now, nobody's allowed to see his tax return. And when he leaves office, you're going to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, you might be right.
You might be right there. His biggest mistake ever.
You might be right there, Andrew. He may need a presidential pardon, and so he's got to hope that Joe Biden is so senile he gives him one. Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Richard in Manchester. Go ahead, Richard.
Good evening, George. Thank you very much for having me on. It's nice to talk to you again. A long time I spoke to you.
Thanks.
Really, I wanted to vent my feelings against not the Scottish people, the SNP, and the arrogance that they are showing at the moment, both in Westminster. They have no respect for anybody. It's as if they're fighting the Brexit story all over again, which they have done for 3.5 years. And it's getting everybody down here. And when we know about people going to Scotland and then being turned away, then I just throw the towel in and I think, I cannot believe what she's doing. Do you think she's become a bit of a dictator, George, and nobody in her party is trying to lead her?
I do think she has authoritarian tendencies. The SNP is a very highly centralized party. It's like a Marxist-Leninist organization without the politics, without the communism. The structure of it is as such, and the all power to the leader mentality that moves them is very similar to some of the old-style Marxist-Leninist ruling parties. They are, for example, presiding over a disastrous coronavirus epidemic in which they are complicit, just like the British government, in incompetence or worse. They covered up an outbreak at the Nike conference in Edinburgh, for example, which would have given early warning to many people who caught the virus and needn't have. They shipped old people into care homes and refused to allow old people who were sick in the care homes to go to hospital. It was a kind of euthanasia. And at the same time, the same people are selling SNP face masks for the profit of the party. You really couldn't make that one up, but that's happened in the last day or two. I should just say, Richard, nobody is actually being turned away at the border. What we have is a group of real space cadets, SNP space cadets, the unwashed, the utter fanatics who are screaming and shouting and swearing at people coming from England, which has been absolutely disastrous for the Scottish tourist industry, which is one of the last industries that we had still standing after the pandemic. Not that the pandemic is over. So I'm not in second place to you, Richard, in my ire against the SNP, whose economic illiteracy is famous even on this show.
She shouldn't be a small country like hers, and the deepest respect to everybody in Scotland. The leader should not be leading in this way. She's got this thing of, I'm going to go back into the EU. The GDP is down. Everything is down. She's just gone completely insane.
Yeah. Well, it's her way or the highway. I'll tell you what, Richard, tomorrow night at 8 p.m., I'll be speaking online on all of this, on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitter. If you follow the Alliance for Unity. Alliance 4, the number 4, Unity. You'll see it on your phone, or you can watch on Facebook or on YouTube. That's tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Thank you very much indeed for the call. Lisa says, are the Americans finally waking up to the tyranny of their government? But wait, what about how their government treats other humans in their own sovereign countries? I doubt if the Americans are waking up. It was the Americans that picked Donald Trump and the Americans that picked Joe Biden. And that, I'm afraid, is a very damning indictment against them. Now, in response to the poll, Umar says, a waste of time keeping the royals. And Rob says, Andrew will destroy the royal image that so many believe to be idols. Thank God the truth comes out. Stop these vile beasts. And Mark, I should say, Andrew completely denies the allegations against him. And Mark says, if you can be convinced that these German aristocrats should attain power, wealth and privilege in the UK by birth, you can similarly be convinced that the elite are born to rule, and that as a peasant you should know your place and be happy begging for scraps. Let me know your views on this, 02077 982 255. And on Facebook, Tony says, why are you so against Scotland becoming an independent country? What do you stand to lose? We don't trust Westminster, but obviously you must. No, look, I don't have anything to lose. Personally, I'm doing rather well. And I can work anywhere. I can work in America, I can work in Russia, I can work in London, I can work in Scotland, I can work anywhere. All I need is a camera and a microphone. So I don't actually personally stand to lose anything at all. But unlike some, I just don't act in my own interest. I try to look out for the interests of the working people. And the interests of the working people are not served by severing a small island of English-speaking people just so you can wave your flag and shout boo at Johnny Foreigner at the border. And if you want to hear more, tune in tomorrow night at 8 p.m, as I just described. Raymond says, we all love Galloway. Honest as the day is long. What a guy. Thank you, Raymond. And Red Resistance says, I see Corbyn's legal fund is heading for 300,000 in 3 days, a fact that's upsetting the powers that be in the Blairite Labour Party. Well, of course, it's their own fault. The Blairites are back in power because they were allowed back in power. Tony Blair is still a member of the Labour Party, and he made a rare intervention yesterday, as he made a rare intervention last week, and the week before that, and every week. And the only reason he's still a thing in Labour politics is because he was allowed to continue in Labour politics. Indeed, John McDonnell, the right-hand man of Jeremy Corbyn, said, come back. He shouldn't be remembered for the Iraq war. He's not a war criminal. That's what John McDonnell said. So I'm afraid that the Corbynites are being beaten by a rod that they made for their own back. And of course, this having fed their friends to the crocodiles in the hope that the crocodiles would be sated. But of course, a crocodile has a very big appetite, and the crocodiles are now eating them. Sean raises the same issue. The Labour Party is finished, so far as I'm concerned. I wish it only destruction. And I think they deserve all the destruction that they're going to get. But then I'm the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, which is a rival party for the affections of the working class in Britain. So I would say that, wouldn't I? And Timothy says, can you discuss the attack on RT by the Labour Party? Well, thankfully, I just did there on my RT short. In the royal row, who's in the right? William and Kate, 38% now, down 1. Harry and Meghan, 12%, down 2. Not many fans there. Abolish the monarchy, now at 50%, up 3. You've still got an hour to vote on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. More than 1,000 of you have already voted, but let's get it bigger even than that. But first, the news with Jamie Lowe.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Prophets, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
It's time to double down with Max and Stacy.
Yeah, double down. We're talking markets, finance, business, economics, ka-ching, bling, just about everything money related on Sputnik. It's called Double Down.
We're asking, are dead cats bouncing or have fundamentals changed? That's this week on Double Down.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
Britain's Foreign Secretary has defended the reintroduction of a 14-day coronavirus quarantine for Britons returning from Spain. Dominic Raab said the government took the decision as swiftly as they could. According to Mr Raab, the government received data on Friday which showed a large rise in coronavirus cases across the country. Although there has been criticism of the snap decision, Raab said the government could not apologise. The UK's biggest tour operator, TUI, has now cancelled all mainland Spanish holidays until August the 9th. Asked why holidaymakers were not told earlier that Spain was under assessment, Raab said giving vague advice would create more uncertainty. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has placed one city in lockdown over fears that the country has its first coronavirus case. North Korea's central news agency is reporting that a resident in Kaesong on the border with South Korea displayed suspected COVID-19 symptoms. The lockdown was declared on Friday afternoon, and if it's confirmed, a positive test result would be North Korea's first official coronavirus case since the start of the global pandemic. North Korea has repeatedly said it has no virus cases on its territory, a claim that has been questioned by foreign experts. Police in the US city of Seattle have clashed with crowds marching in support of anti-racism protests in one of the most tense of several rallies held across the country on Saturday. Officers used stun grenades and pepper spray as protesters set afire and broke windows. The march was in support of ongoing protests in Portland. 45 people were arrested while 21 officers were injured. In Austin, Texas, one man was killed during a Black Lives Matter protest. Police said initial reports suggested that the victim might have been carrying a rifle and approached a vehicle from where a person shot and killed him. The suspect has been arrested and is cooperating with officers. In Seattle, thousands of protesters had initially gathered peacefully, carrying signs such as "Feds go home" and "We are living in a police state," and shouting chants of "No justice, no peace." Protesters then threw large rocks, bottles, fireworks and other explosives at officers on Saturday. Police said others set fire to a portable trailer and a construction site, police said in a series of tweets. Poland is to withdraw from a European treaty aimed at preventing violence against women. The country's justice minister said the treaty contains elements of an ideological nature which the Polish government consider harmful. The right-wing cabinet says that the treaty violates parents' right by requiring schools to teach children about gender, according to reports. A plane is believed to have collided with a hot air balloon shortly before it crashed into an apartment block in Germany, killing 3 people and injuring a child. A fire was started when the light aircraft hit the building in the city of Wessel, around 35 miles north of Dusseldorf. Witnesses told local media that the plane had hit a balloon before coming down. More than 900 British sex offenders have disappeared off the police radar, with many thought to have disguised their identities by changing their names and not telling officers. The simple deed-poll process takes 15 minutes online, and over 1,300 sex offenders have already done it since committing their offences. Campaigners are warning, while it's an offence for people on the sex offenders register to change their names without telling officials, that it's not incentive enough for them not to do it, and it's easy to do and common practice. However, freedom of information requests to police forces throughout Britain has shown that more than 900 have simply disappeared. A St Bernard rescue dog has itself been rescued after collapsing while walking down England's highest mountain. Members of the Wasdale Mountain Rescue Team went to 4-year-old Daisy's aid on Scarfell Pike. A team spokesman said Daisy had been showing signs of pain in her legs and was refusing to move. St Bernards are traditionally on the other side of such mercy missions. They were originally bred to rescue people in the Italian and Swiss Alps. Friday's operation, which involved 16 members of the mountain rescue team over 5 hours, as rescuers carried Daisy on a stretcher over obstacles, including a waterfall. And finally, a woman in the US state of Virginia was delighted when a large black bear decided to take a nap in a kiddie's pool in her backyard. Regina Keller, who is no stranger to bears, has been taking pictures of the wildlife in her backyard for 12 years. Her home is remote and it backs up to the George Washington National Forest in Fort Valley, Virginia, so she's used to getting a variety of furry visitors, including deer, bears, foxes and squirrels. On July 19th, she was watering her flowers when a large male bear wandered into her yard. The bear stayed in the pool, relaxing and napping for about an hour before he was chased off by the sound of her grandchildren arriving in her driveway with their dogs. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway, only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, there's a lot of traffic on the extradition highway, but it only goes one way. The United States are trying to have extradited the world-famous, world-historic publisher Julian Assange, and they have moved heaven and earth to bring that about. They also want to question Prince Andrew. And though Prince Andrew says he's happy to cooperate, surprisingly, no such meeting has taken place. But the United States is resolute that they will not extradite to Britain one Anne Sekulas. Anne Sekulas is a very senior intelligence officer in the CIA. Her husband, of lesser rank, is also a CIA officer. They were both stationed at what is laughingly described as a Royal Air Force base in England, which was, of course, a cover for an American Air Force base and a nest of American spies. All of that would be boilerplate, except Anne Sekulas came out of the base, drove her car up the wrong side of the road and killed poor Harry Dunn. Not even 19 years old. Killed him. His family are utterly distraught, not just at the loss of their son, but at the absolute failure of the American government or the British government or their own MP to give them at least the closure that would come with the person responsible, who admits that she is responsible, being held to account, facing justice. But she didn't face justice. She scarpered out of the country with the full and conspiratorial collaboration of the British Foreign Office. She falsely claimed that she had diplomatic immunity, an immunity which she did not have. That's why there's an Interpol notice out for her arrest. But there has been some good news, limited good news this week. And Radd Seiger, who is the spokesperson for the Harry Dunn family campaign, is a regular guest on the Mother of All talk shows, and a very fine spokesman he is. He's on next, but first, a clip from the bereaved mother, Charlotte Charles. Take a look at this.
I'd like to say thank you to the US government for working with the UK government and us to bring about the changes to ensure that another family will never go through the injustice that we are having to suffer at the moment. I'd also like to say to the US government not to be afraid to send Ansakoulis back. I'm aware that you're worried it would set a precedent, but diplomatic community is not there to cover this situation, and each situation should be judged on its own merits. So please rethink that and send her back. I'd also like to say to Ansakoulis that she's not being held by the US government that we're aware of, and that she is free to put herself on a plane and come over here and face our system, our justice system. I understand it must be scary, of course. I understand that she must be suffering to a certain degree as well, but certainly the suffering is not going to be as bad as what ours is. We've lost a child. She still has all three of hers. We have the fairest justice system in the world, so please just come over, get this over and done with, and let's build some bridges.
Powerful and from the heart. That was Charlotte Charles. She's the mother of poor Harry Dunn, killed by an American intelligence officer of very senior rank outside an RAF base before he was even 19. Radd Seiger is the best spokesman any family in such desperate straits could possibly reach for, and that happened just because he was their neighbour. We've been glad to welcome him several times, and glad now, Radd, to welcome you back again onto the mother of all talk shows. Let's start with the good news, Radd. What's the meaning of the agreement that was reached between the British and American governments on future cases?
George, good evening to you, and thank you for having me. Look, let me remind your listeners and viewers what this campaign is all about. And there were three limbs to it when we started last September, October. The first one, Ansakoulis is coming back. And make no mistake, that is exactly what's going to happen. Number two, this will never happen again to another family, given the suffering that I have witnessed. We committed right from the outset to make sure that this was never going to happen again. And number three, that there was going to be huge improvements in road safety around all bases in the UK, given the often substandard driving that we see from our American friends who, through no fault of their own, come over to a completely different driving environment and have obviously different training. So, George, I can tell you this evening, after this week, that after both governments agreed to close what they call an anomaly or a loophole, we say it's an absurdity, that dependents or spouses of CIA officers, which is what Ansakoulis was, have greater immunity than the CIA officers themselves. Imagine that. And that's what the government say was the case. That is the loophole that has been closed. So heroically, this family have fought long and hard over these last few months, and that is what they have achieved. Every family living near RAF Croughton, and there are tens of thousands of us, can go to bed this weekend, certain in the knowledge that if they do encounter bad driving from the Americans, that driver will have to stay and face the consequences. So we owe them all a huge debt, George. It's an incredible achievement. You know as well as I do that the American government is a bit like a supertanker patrolling around the world. And it's not easy to stop a supertanker in its tracks or to get it to change direction. Charlotte Charles and Tim Dunn, ordinary people from South Northamptonshire, stood up last October when we were in the White House to Donald Trump with me by their side, and we said, no, Mr. President, this is not going to happen, and Ansakoulis is coming back. And look, they have made history. They are, I think, they have left their mark. Harry Dunn has left a major legacy, and we're all slightly better off for it. Incredible.
Well, of course, I congratulate you on all of that. And with the family, you have fought a magnificent campaign. But we're no nearer seeing Sakulis coming back and facing trial for what she did, are we?
George, we have to be very careful this evening, because if you look at the words that were said earlier in the week by the American government, by the foreign secretary, look, their position for now is that she is not coming back. You no longer hear those words never that they were saying when we started this campaign off. The position has shifted. And if let's put the legality to one side of her position, whether she had diplomatic immunity or not. And that will be decided by the senior courts in London in November. Morally, they are bankrupt. George, this is an indefensible position. And, the United States for decades has masqueraded around the world as the most virtuous nation, that we should all follow their example. We should all do as they do. Well, but for the last few months, they have been involved in torturing this family, both mentally and emotionally. And, whilst they're engaged in that, they have they can stake no claim to that position. And, look, they are damaging their own reputation, and millions of us in this nation around the world are scratching our heads and saying, well, why should we follow their example when they're doing this to their family? George, there are many disgusting human traits that we see. I think hypocrisy is one of the worst ones. Do as you say. Don't preach to other people. And if you look at Woody Johnson's, the ambassador's Twitter feed and Secretary Pompeo's Twitter feed, they proclaim to be the guardians, the gatekeepers of the free world. Well, look, until Ansakoulis is back, they can stake no such claim. And just to remind everybody, this is not about vengeance or retribution. This amazing family wished Mrs. Sakoulis no harm. They don't hate her. They hate what she did, but they call for her to do the right thing, like you and I would have to do, like anybody else would have to do. So the whole issue of diplomatic immunity, as far as we're concerned, is a red herring, even if she had it. This is not what it's for, and you stay and face the consequences of your action. What sort of example are the American government and Mrs. Sakoulis setting to her children and to everybody else? We don't run away from problems, we confront them. And it's the least that she could do, it's the least that the American government could do as we approach the 1-year anniversary of this tragedy, to come back and to give this family a bit of justice that we would all want if this had happened to our son, and a bit of closure, and then she can get on the plane and go back home.
Radd Seiger, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows, and good luck in November in the High Court. Let me read a few more of the comments. Stephen says on Facebook, the government will do anything to keep us away from what's really happening in UK politics. And Karen says, since Prince Andrew has stepped back from royal duties last November, the funds for his private bodyguards were taken away. However, having complained to his mother, she had it reinstated at a cost to the taxpayer of £3 million per year. What an absolute disgrace. That's an awful lot of money, Karen. You sure that's right? Tom says Ghislaine Maxwell will leave the USA eventually as a free woman because she's already done the deal with the feds and will not implicate those powerful liberal elites. Well, I don't know about that, Tom. She's facing 30 to 40 years in prison on the charges that she is arraigned. Gail says the monarchy represents colonial plunder, classism, repression, old white supremacy, and clearly the lie that royal blood means anything. And on YouTube, Holly says, Donald Trump did nothing to help in COVID-19. Give me a break. He's been the very reason for this disaster, and every single death lays at his feet. Amy says, I lived in Russia almost a decade and had full access to BBC World News, Euronews, channels from all over the world. Now in the UK, I'm going to have my news sources censored, and by the failing Labour Party. I'm from Oldham. People hate them there. Keir and co. still don't get it. And on email, Ross says, I think I want to say a massive thanks for you being the only, virtually the only politician in the UK who has the guts to take the fight to the SNP. You and I are diametrically opposed on many political issues, but on the issue of Brexit and Scottish independence, we are on the same team. I have the utmost respect for people like you who stand by their beliefs regardless of your politics. Thank you, Ross. Do tune in 8 o'clock tomorrow night, Monday night, on all platforms. And Alex says, in my opinion, the monarchy has reached the point where it has lost all credibility following the Epstein links to Prince Andrew. If there was ever justification for keeping the monarchy as an instrument of soft power, surely the loss of face has now completely blunted what remained of it. Well, you're right, of course, about Prince Andrew, but the Queen has led a blameless life and a very long life in her role as Britain's head of state. It's not really fair to blame her for the sins of one of her sons. Now, this is where I look back in history at what happened in 7 eventful days in the years of history which shaped us for good and ill. It was on this day in 1945 that Britain's wartime leader Winston Churchill lost a general election to Clement Attlee's Labour Party after the party won a sweeping victory. Out of 627 seats, Labour increased its seats from 164 to 393, giving the party its first independent majority of 159 seats over all other parties. Quite incredible given Churchill's role as the country's leader in the Second World War. We had just won the war and the leader, the wartime leader, was dumped out. Anyway, Labour were in. The crucial victory led to the creation of the National Health Service and the welfare state. Again, on this day in 1956, Egypt's president, Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser, announced the nationalization of the Suez Canal to provide funding for the construction of the Aswan High Dam. As well as nationalizing the Suez Canal Company, Nasser also blockaded the Straits of Tiran, Israel's only outlet to the Red Sea. Secretly, Britain and France then joined forces with Israel, although this alliance was denied for years afterwards, and 3 months later, on the 29th of October, Israeli troops invaded Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. 2 days later, British and French military forces attacked and invaded Egypt's Canal Zone, under the pretext of seeking to separate the warring parties, although, of course, it later transpired that Britain and France and Israel had conspired to bring about exactly that situation. So the intervention of the US President, Dwight Eisenhower, he intervened and ordered Israel, France, and Britain to withdraw from the war. It was, at the time, the biggest humiliation that the former colonial powers, big powers, Britain and France, had ever suffered. It's very interesting, isn't it, that the American president ordered them to withdraw. And of course, history now records the skullduggery involved, bringing shame on the governments concerned. A day later, on July 27, in 1940, Bugs Bunny made his first appearance in the Warner Brothers cartoon, Wild Hare. What's up, Dak? And the 27th of July in 1965 was also when Edward Heath won the Conservative leadership contest, triggered by the unexpected resignation of Sir Alec Douglas Hume. Heath went on to become Prime Minister in 1970, and of course, without a referendum, and only with the help of the right wing of the Labour Party, took us into the then common market in 1973. On July 28, 1976, hundreds of thousands were killed in an earthquake in China. The quake virtually destroyed the city of Tangshan, northeast of Beijing, with an official death toll of 240,000 people. Unbelievable. This was also the week in 2003 that the comedian Bob Hope, who never made me laugh, died just 2 months after celebrating his 100th birthday. By the way, I heard there just before I came in to the studio that Claudia Cardinale, the great actress, also passed away this day. I think she may have been 103. But Bob Hope celebrated his 100th birthday and then died. Claudia was 104. God rest her. And in 2005, the IRA formally ordered an end to its armed campaign after 30 years. On the 29th of July in 1981, Prince Charles and Diana Spencer were married at St. Paul's Cathedral before an invited congregation of 3,500 people and an estimated global TV audience of 750 million, making it the most popular program ever broadcast. Just think about that when you're voting in this poll. Their two sons, William and Harry, later fell out, if we are to believe the latest book, Finding Freedom, over Harry's choice of a bride in Meghan Markle. This story will run and run. 8 years before, in 1973, the English heavy metal band Led Zeppelin had more than $200,000 in cash stolen from a safety deposit box at the New York Hilton. Bang went that night's drugs money. In football, on the 30th of July, in the inaugural World Cup final in Montevideo, the hosts Uruguay beat bitter rivals Argentina 4-2. Doesn't actually say what year that was. Maybe someone can help me with that. In 1966, on the same day, England won football's World Cup for the first time since the tournament began in 1930, thanks to a Russian linesman and having played every game at home. A crowd of 93,000 spectators filled London's Wembley Stadium to watch the host nation play West Germany. Another 400 million people around the world watched the match on TV. In the final moments of extra time, Sir Geoff Hurst, scored the third goal to give England a 4-2 victory and to become the first man ever to score a hat-trick in a World Cup final. Mind you, his second goal wasn't actually over the line. On the 30th in 1974, 30th of July, the Prime Ministers of Greece and Turkey signed a peace agreement to settle the Cyprus crisis. Turkish-controlled northern Cyprus remains unrecognised by the international community, and the UN continues to protect the buffer zone or green line separating the Greek and Turkish populations. And on the 31st of July, in 1962, the former fascist leader, Sir Oswald Mosley, was assaulted at a rally in London's East End. So sad, too bad, never mind, as we say in Glasgow. He and members of his anti-Semitic black shirts were punched to the ground as soon as their meeting opened at Ridley Road in Dalston. Police were forced to close the meeting within 3 minutes and made 54 arrests, including Sir Oswald's son, Max Mosley, who gave £500,000, strangely, to Labour's then deputy leader, Tom Watson. Whatever happened to that money? Did anyone ever track that down? And in 1991, by the way, in my counterfactual historical novel, Queensway, Oswald Mosley becomes the fascist Prime Minister of Britain. You need to read that. The second one will be out later this year, so you need to get the first one now. can get it from info@georgegalloway.com or from Amazon. And in 1991, on the last day of July, the United States and the Soviet Union signed an historic agreement reducing their stockpiles of nuclear warheads by about a third. That was another eventful 7 days that shook the world on this day and round about it. Now, let's take some calls. John in Westphalia in Germany on Answer Coolest. You're first, John. Go ahead.
George, I was listening to the gentleman on the case of Answer Coolest. What happened is terrible. I have every sympathy with the family, but I don't believe Answer Coolest will ever be back in the United Kingdom. These things in the Answer Coolest case, I have to say, is not unique. These things have been going on here in Germany and no doubt in Japan, where American forces have been stationed, British forces in Germany, so for 50, 60 years. These are sovereign treaties. They're nothing to do with courts or really diplomatic immunity or political parties or just who happens to be in government at the time. And the British are as complicit in similar acts that have happened here. I mean, British servicemen would, cripple a German policeman for life. The military police would simply turn up at the police station where the man had been arrested and take him away.
Sure, but Germany was an occupied country. We're not formally occupied.
Well, yes, but this transcended that into the modern era. British forces have been here up until really the last year or so, and these rules, status of forces agreements, pertained throughout.
That's true. That's true,
time.
but that's not the basis on which she fled the country. She fled the country claiming that she had diplomatic immunity as the wife of someone who did have diplomatic immunity, and it's been established this week that that was not true. And that's why there's an Interpol warrant for her. Yeah,
that may well be correct. And I don't know the details of it, but I suspect lying behind it all are these sovereign treaties. I mean, it's the same with American servicemen in Japan. They can kill a woman. Almost outright murder rather than manslaughter by accident, and the military authorities will simply turn up and take the person away and repatriate the person to the United States. He may go into a military prison, but he generally will not face justice locally. Part of it, I think, is to do with the embarrassment that it causes. For example, a British serviceman who perhaps perpetrates some act in Germany, they don't want it all over the German newspapers. Or the embarrassment of British servicemen in a German court, etc., and it applies to the Americans equally. It's an unfortunate state of affairs, but I think most of the governments are literally scared to change that system for fear that they fall foul of it themselves.
John, a great pleasure to hear your voice again. Thanks for calling in from Westphalia in Germany. Mike is in South Carolina on Harry Dunn, the same case. Let's hear from him. Mike, welcome.
Hey, George, good to talk to you again. Never missed your show.
Thank you, sir.
I agree with a lot of what the previous caller said. And in fact, I'll put it this way. I feel for Harry Dunn's family for their loss, but that loss is any loss of innocent life is horrible. But we do this all over the world. England does it. The United States does it. We all do it. And we all have these CIA in the United States and your equivalent over there in UK. And they're all hand in hand with all of this. But here's the total crux of the matter. Now, I'm going to make a few statements, and you correct me if I'm wrong. This was an automobile accident.
Yeah, okay? she was driving up the wrong side of the road.
On the wrong side of the road.
Yeah.
And that makes sense because a lot of people from England drive on the wrong side of the road here. But it happens, and it's purely an accident. And what's going to happen, there's never going to be any prison time for Anne, even if she came back, okay? Now, you've got all of these things of diplomatic immunity that that the government's trying to bring up and use as a reason for her not to come back. But why not just try her in absentia and go ahead and get a monetary settlement?
I could be corrected, but I don't think we have the system of trying in absentia. Maybe someone will correct me if I'm wrong. Nobody's trying to put her in jail, Mike. The family don't want to put her in jail. They just want her to face justice.
Well,
Just appear in
I'm
a
sure
court.
that she understands.
Appear in a court.
I'm sure she understands.
And be found guilty.
Well, I'm sure that she understands what she did, and that when the accident happened, I'm sure that the authorities were there at the scene, as they are at the scene of an accident here, and she was allowed to go home to her home there, and then left from there to come back to the United States.
Yeah, she went back into the base, and then the British Foreign Office conspired with the American Embassy in London to allow her to leave the country on a false basis.
That's what these intelligence agencies do. They collaborate with each other because they don't want any more information getting out about what the bad stuff that they do to get out to the public. And unless you want to do away with the UK intelligence agencies and the American intelligence agencies, which I would actually advocate getting rid of all of them.
No,
okay?
I don't want. I don't want rid of them, but I do want them to. Well, I do want them to obey our law. We've got American bases on British soil, and that too is covered by camouflage and subterfuge. They're called British bases. Yeah, they're called RAF bases.
You have American,
but they're USAF bases.
Yes, but you have American bases in over 1,000 places on the continent, and all of this is all part of the same thing. What we really need to do, George, is do away with the United Nations and create an organization like a union of nations where all nations are represented by their population.
Yeah, and unfortunately, though, the permanent members of the Security Council have a veto on any reform.
That's what I'm saying. We need to do away with the United Nations.
Yeah, but then the permanent flag would not be in your new organization, and therefore it wouldn't be able to really do anything.
Okay. Here's the thing. If you have a union of nations that are not beholden to the United States and other members who have veto power in the Security Council, you can actually pass laws through your union that says, okay, if you're not going to abide by these rules, we're not going to trade with you. You're not going to be part of this.
Okay, Mike, thanks very much for that. Always a pleasure to hear from South Carolina. Let's go to New York, where April has a point of view on the dollar. Go ahead, April.
Wonderful. I am happy to be here.
I'm very happy you're here. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm from Brooklyn, New York Stock Exchange, okay, the city of the fraud and corruption. And I no longer live there. I live in Houston, Texas. And I'm 33 years young. I'm a millennial, and I faced 2 recessions and this pandemic. So we've been hit hardest. We've been punched in the face time and time again. And we see the student loan debt rallying up. And we see the stock market was bailed out before the American people. And this is what they do time and time again. It must come to an end. I'm not sure if people realize, but there's a coin shortage in America right now. And the printing to paper, it's oblivion. Powell and Mnuchin have turned on the money printer, and they printed 10,000 years of my hard work. There's no way for me to compete at this time. There's no way for me to retire at this time. So I save in Bitcoin. I believe Bitcoin is the sovereign way out. Gold has been manipulated as well as other precious metals. My generation will move the market digitally. That's what I believe.
Well, I don't know anything about Bitcoin, really. I do know that my friend Max Kaiser is very big on it. Whether it becomes the solution, as you seem to think, must be debatable. But for the moment, the issue really is that people are fleeing from the dollar. That's why its value is going down. And one of the reasons they're fleeing it is because American domination of the world's financial markets have been overdone, overreached. And when you are, as I said earlier, not only sanctioning your obvious enemies, but actually sanctioning your best friends, well, that's a sanction too far, April.
1,000,000%. We see it in our faces. We see Iran and China have made a deal, more or less bartering oil.
Yeah,
this
and Russia and China are now effectively one economy.
Totally de-dollarizing, getting rid of the U.S. hegemony. We must realize that the dollar is no longer king, and all kings must get their heads cut off, as Basquiat mentioned. I am an avid follower of Matt Seiger, and I will start following you. I just found you today, and I am pleased to be on here talking truth and sense to all people.
Well, thank you, April. I'm slightly sad that you only found me today because I've been around quite a long time, but I hope you stay for the duration. Thank you very much. April, not in New York, but from New York, in Houston, Texas. We've been around the United States this evening, and we're only about halfway through the show, but let's take a 2-minute break, and I'll be right back.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for a regular segment called Criminal Injustice about the most egregious conduct of our courts and how justice is denied to so many people in this country. Tune in to Loud and Clear this Thursday and every Thursday for thorough and independent analysis of our criminal injustice system.
The giant Labour Party sale and clearance is now on. Hurry now, as we've got zero interest in our party. It's literally the lowest it's ever been. Give up on the common man and save today. That's right, we're getting rid of all of the Corbynites. Literally every single one. Being a Blairite has never been more in style. Only available at what should be the UK's biggest political party. The new Labour Party. We're doing this again.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
In the Royal Row, who's in the right? William and Kate, 38%. Harry and Meghan, 11%. Abolish the monarchy, 51%. Now, actually, plurality. The Twitter feed is the place to go to cast your vote. 1,308 of you have done so, and you've got about 15 minutes to get your vote in. So go to @GeorgeGalloway on Twitter and cast your vote on that subject. Now, Todd Barrow is a country and western artist. It's not my genre. In fact, I'd be interested in what your genres are. Maybe that should be the second poll, Ron, on what kind of music our audience appreciates. It's not mine. Kenny Rogers, I kind of liked a few of his tracks. But Todd Barrow is a country and western artist with a difference. He is counterintuitively actually quite a political progressive. And with all due respect to the country and western music industry, it's not well known for its racial sensitivities, its appreciation of the equality of men and women. It tends to be on the edge, at least, of misogyny, and you don't see many black people at a country and western music concert. But Todd is different. Listen to him. We didn't get much politics in that clip, but Todd Barrow is not afraid to talk about issues like Black Lives Matter, Donald Trump, and so on. So let's go over and talk with him on Skype. From the United States, Todd, You're the first country and western artist I have ever spoken to. So we've made history for a start. Tell us, what's the health of the genre? As I said earlier, it appeals to a rather narrow, quite large, but rather narrow subsection of the population in the United States, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, it's nice to meet you, George, and thanks for having me on your show. What a privilege and an honor to be here. And, you know, primarily country music has been a white space, if you pardon my French, as far as marketing and merchandising. But, you know, it has a lot to do with demographics and culture and your upbringing. And I have a lot of fans, a fan base from all over the world, actually, from different races. So I'm trying to break those barriers down to bring more people to it and draw them in.
How would you define it? I mean, I know that music, like the camel, is easy to recognize but difficult to define. But how would you define country and western music? I mean, it comes out of the westward expansion of the United States, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Out of rural white America, it's more, I guess you'd say, ideological. The romance, the romanticization of it, and the fascination of it. But I would just say that country music to me is a certain feeling, attitude, and lifestyle. It's a heartbeat. It's how you treat people. It's what you do every day. It's about character, to my, you know, the way I look at it.
Now, I mean, there's been a few big losses in your genre, Kenny Rogers and the Wichita lineman. He also passed away. The most famous, I suppose, might be Dolly Parton. Would you agree?
I would think so. Dolly Parton is sensational. And she's crossed over, you know, many generations and still going. So, yeah, she's phenomenal. I love her, and much respect for Dolly.
Now, am I right in saying that virtually everyone who comes to see country stars are white people? They're not necessarily nowadays rural, but they've got to have some kind of attachment to or affection for the rugged outdoors, for the South, for the West. Of the country. That's my picture, at least.
Yeah.
It may be a cliche, but that's my picture. In which case, what do you think they're feeling now that statues are coming down and protests are erupting everywhere over the Black Lives Matter, over slavery, over the role of slave traders in the foundation of the state, over the destruction of the Native American population to make way for these settlers. Are any of these issues bubbling under? Do they appear in song? Might they be a part of the conversation in the country and western industry?
I think so. I think we're going to have to address it. I think people are being careful right now to be sensitive, you know. I mean, there's so much chaos going on right now here in America and, of course, around the world. But what's crazy is a lot of these statues that they're tearing down they were more advocates than anything. So I don't think they've done their homework, honestly. But destroying property, I wouldn't destroy a statue if it was back from, you know, the days of someone who had a relative and was a big fan or they appreciate their heritage. You know, I respect it. You know, it's history. What are you going to do? Erase history? You can't. I mean, history's history. So let's move forward and see what we can do to rebuild lives.
Yeah, of course, I recognize that argument. But what would be the reaction, for example, in a country and western crowd to someone taking the knee?
Yeah, absurd, I think. Of course, I've served in the military, and many of my friends have. So being a veteran of the service, it it tends to really get to us when we see that kind of behavior, because we really don't think that that's the route to go, because we need to respect our country, whether you're in the UK, United States of America, or wherever you live. You know, you kind of embrace your culture, your flag, and what you stand for.
So it's a pretty right-wing crowd. Would it be fair to say that that Donald Trump is the most popular politician in your genre?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, we're all pretty much pulling for Trump. I think he's done a great job. I think he's, you know, of course, not everybody's perfect. We all make mistakes, but there's been a definite attack on what he's tried to do, and it's very disturbing to me. And I'm going to stand up for what, you know, our Constitution is all about. And so it's mind-boggling to the division and what's happening in our country. But I would think that that's a true statement, George.
Do you think he's going to pull it off, a second victory, or do you think he's going down?
I think he's going to pull it off. I really do. I think he has a strategy. Of course, the Democrats, you know, they're doing everything they can to destroy our country, and Trump's doing everything he can to hold on to it. It's just insane, and I'm sure you're going to hear a lot of country songs birthed from all this, you know, as we see this thing unfold.
Country star Todd Barrow, thanks for joining us on board the mother of all talk shows. We'll play another few bars of your material. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Todd was billed as a politically progressive country and western star, but I don't know about you, I didn't quite get that from the interview. But nice to talk to him anyway, because all human life is here. Raz is in Croydon on Harry Dunn. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Raz.
Good evening, Georgia. Long-time listener, big fan of yours.
Thank you.
And after tonight, I may well hit you up for being a feet-on-the-ground type of individual that cares about our society and joining your party. Because the only way forward... George, right, let's get to the chase now about Harry Dunn.
Yeah.
I think there was a travesty of justice that went on with Harry Dunn. It's not an excuse. I've been to the United States in... say 9 times over the last 11 years. Yes, for the first day you have to watch and be excused where you are on the road, but to give the excuse that this woman didn't know that what she was doing, add to that the fact that when Harry Dunn's family went over to the US, she was in the Oval Office with President Trump.
Yeah, she was in an anteroom, and they wanted her to meet the family. But the family correctly said, if you want to talk to us about what you did, you'll have to do it in an English court.
Absolutely. Why does the rule of law not extend from the United States to the United Kingdom the same way that we've kowtowed to them over the time?
Julian Assange never killed anybody. But they're moving mountains to try and get their hands on him. It's one-way traffic, Raz.
It absolutely is. And the thing is, again, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love American people. I've been there so many times, and the government.
Yeah, we all do. We all love them. Yeah.
I think, and again, like I say to you, harking back to your earlier days. You in front of Congress, man, you destroyed them.
That was my best day so far.
George, you know what? You didn't destroy them with lies. You destroyed them with the truth, my friend.
It was a triumph. It was a triumph of House of Commons versus U.S. Senate. No doubt about that.
Absolutely, George. But the way I see it is, again, let's have some parity between this special relationship. Yeah. Let's make sure that we get as good as we're given. And it should be a two-way street, and it isn't. And I really feel...
Well, look, Raz, I'm in favour of the special relationship. I just don't want the kind of special relationship that Miss Lewinsky had with President Clinton. I don't need to take the analogy much further than that with you, I'm sure. Let's talk with Jared in Pennsylvania. Go ahead, Jared.
Hello, George. And I just want to get off just saying right away, we just, my father had 106 fever yesterday, and he was taken to the hospital, and the doctor
106?
said he may have, yes, and he may have COVID.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear
And
that, Jared.
This is very serious because I live with him too.
Yeah.
So he may have affected all of us in our house. So we're quarantining as of right now. I can't go to work. None of us can go to work, and it's a disaster what's going on. It
Well,
really is.
how bad is it in Pennsylvania? Is that one of the worst affected areas?
It's not one of the worst affected areas, but we've been seeing a rise recently. New York is sort of like the black hole almost, and then you got like all these other states that are starting to become...
Well, Florida's rapidly catching up.
Arizona, Texas, yeah, all these states with all these lunatics not wearing masks or, going out in public, touching things, and just, it's insane. And we have a president who, shall we say, spends more time tweeting than actually reading at this point. Could you imagine if FDR spent all of his time just tweeting about just the dumbest things on earth after Pearl Harbor?
Yeah, well, of course, it didn't exist then, but I see Trump was regretting that he spent too much time on Twitter. I saw that in an interview he did this week. In a way, Twitter was the making of him and might, in the end, be the unmaking of him. Do you think?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much how he basically got his start. Just having all these, tweets, some of them funny, some of them just outright insane. It's very interesting to see his decline over these last few years. And since we're talking about the abolishment of the monarchy, I will be the first American to say I think it is time for us to bring back the monarchy to the
I could be
US
King George.
colonies.
You could bring me back as King George, who lost the place.
Yes.
He lost it. I could take it back. Jared, I sincerely wish your father all the best and hope that it hasn't spread through the family and that you all pull through. And may God bless you all. Thanks very much indeed for bringing us that call from Pennsylvania to the end of the second hour. The Royal Row, who's in the right? William and Kate, 38%. Harry and Meghan, 11%, down 1. Abolish the monarchy, 51%, up 1. 1,341 of you voted on my Twitter feed, and that poll is now closed. Richard says the royals are the #1 benefit scroungers in the world. And Jorge says wrong side of the road is rubbish. She has been in the country long enough to drive on the right side of the road. She wouldn't have fled the scene, let alone the country. And Virginia says, I think Biden wants to sabotage his presidency and wants Trump to win. And Roy says, we don't want any US military bases in the UK. Maya says it was a hit and run, no accident. She didn't stop. And Jill says, could the vaping illnesses and deaths of last year have been COVID? Well, we need to get this public inquiry up and running, Jill, so that we can answer some of these questions. Scouser Lar says we should definitely abolish the monarchy. The worshipping of these people by monarchists and the right-wing media is a disturbing cult. And Phil says, George, can you try Lancashire tea? It's far superior to its Yorkshire alternative. Phil, I don't know how many times I've got to say this. It's not Yorkshire tea. It's only a Yorkshire tea cup. It's Red Bush tea. It's Red Bush tea that I drink. There's no product placement here. On the contrary, I might drink out of their mug, but I wouldn't drink their tea. And on YouTube, Michael says, no one is above the law. And Kelly says, Dolly Parton for Biden's vice presidential running mate. That's not a bad call, actually. He says it's going to be a woman, and there are few finer women on the earth than Dolly Parton. Apart from my own wife, who may, right at this moment, for all I know, be going into labour and about to deliver my 6th child. The due date is on Tuesday. Please keep your fingers crossed for all. She hadn't given birth 5 minutes ago, I'm told by my editor. I might ask how he knows that. But first, let's take the news with Jamie Lowe.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Prophets, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
It's time to double down with Max and Stacy.
Yeah, double down. We're talking markets, finance, business, economics, ka-ching, bling, just about everything money related on Sputnik. It's called Double Down.
We're asking, are dead cats bouncing or have fundamentals changed? That's this week on Double Down.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
Britain's Foreign Secretary has defended the reintroduction of a 14-day coronavirus quarantine for Britons returning from Spain. Dominic Raab said the government took the decision as swiftly as they could. According to Mr Raab, the government received data on Friday which showed a large rise in coronavirus cases across the country. Although there has been criticism of the snap decision, Raab said the government could not apologise. The UK's biggest tour operator, TUI, has now cancelled all mainland Spanish holidays until August the 9th. Asked why holidaymakers were not told earlier that Spain was under assessment, Raab said giving vague advice would create more uncertainty. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has placed one city in lockdown over fears that the country has its first coronavirus case. North Korea's central news agency is reporting that a resident in Kaesong on the border with South Korea displayed suspected COVID-19 symptoms. The lockdown was declared on Friday afternoon, and if it's confirmed, a positive test result would be North Korea's first official coronavirus case since the start of the global pandemic. North Korea has repeatedly said it has no virus cases on its territory, a claim that has been questioned by foreign experts. Police in the US city of Seattle have clashed with crowds marching in support of anti-racism protests in one of the most tense of several rallies held across the country on Saturday. Officers used stun grenades and pepper spray as protesters set afire and broke windows. The march was in support of ongoing protests in Portland. 45 people were arrested while 21 officers were injured. In Austin, Texas, one man was killed during a Black Lives Matter protest. Police said initial reports suggested that the victim might have been carrying a rifle and approached a vehicle from where a person shot and killed him. The suspect has been arrested and is cooperating with officers. In Seattle, thousands of protesters had initially gathered peacefully, carrying signs such as "Feds go home" and "We are living in a police state," and shouting chants of "No justice, no peace." Protesters then threw large rocks, bottles, fireworks and other explosives at officers on Saturday. Police said others set fire to a portable trailer and a construction site, police said in a series of tweets. Poland is to withdraw from a European treaty aimed at preventing violence against women. The country's justice minister said the treaty contains elements of an ideological nature which the Polish government consider harmful. The right-wing cabinet says that the treaty violates parents' right by requiring schools to teach children about gender, according to reports. A plane is believed to have collided with a hot air balloon shortly before it crashed into an apartment block in Germany, killing 3 people and injuring a child. A fire was started when the light aircraft hit the building in the city of Wessel, around 35 miles north of Dusseldorf. Witnesses told local media that the plane had hit a balloon before coming down. More than 900 British sex offenders have disappeared off the police radar, with many thought to have disguised their identities by changing their names and not telling officers. The simple deed-poll process takes 15 minutes online, and over 1,300 sex offenders have already done it since committing their offences. Campaigners are warning, while it's an offence for people on the sex offenders register to change their names without telling officials, that it's not incentive enough for them not to do it, and it's easy to do and common practice. However, Freedom of Information requests to police forces throughout Britain has shown that more than 900 have simply disappeared. A St Bernard rescue dog has itself been rescued after collapsing while walking down England's highest mountain. Members of the Wasdale Mountain Rescue Team went to 4-year-old Daisy's aid on Scarfell Pike. A team spokesman said Daisy had been showing signs of pain in her legs and was refusing to move. St Bernards are traditionally on the other side of such mercy missions. They were originally bred to rescue people in the Italian and Swiss Alps. Friday's operation, which involved 16 members of the mountain rescue team over 5 hours, as rescuers carried Daisy on a stretcher over obstacles, including a waterfall. And finally, a woman in the US state of Virginia was delighted when a large black bear decided to take a nap in a kiddie's pool in her backyard. Regina Keller, who is no stranger to bears, has been taking pictures of the wildlife in her backyard for 12 years. Her home is remote and it backs up to the George Washington National Forest in Fort Valley, Virginia, so she's used to getting a variety of furry visitors, including deer, bears, foxes and squirrels. On July 19th, she was watering her flowers when a large male bear wandered into her yard. The bear stayed in the pool, relaxing and napping for about an hour before he was chased off by the sound of her grandchildren arriving in her driveway with their dogs. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway, only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, to summarise my orations this week, on Monday night, that's tomorrow night at 8 p.m, on Scottish nationalism and my Alliance for Unity, which is engaging the interest of a very significant number of people in a very short period of time, so much so that I've just been libelled for the first time. Somebody's alleged that we are being bankrolled by a certain individual, which I don't know whether to laugh or cry, because actually we have not a single penny piece. Not only that, we haven't spent a single penny piece. So zero income and zero expenditure, and yet we have a substantial following in just 15 days since our inception. But when they are alleging you're being bankrolled, you know that you must be hitting home. Sir, we are not being bankrolled by anybody, and I have literally never heard of the individual that you claim is bankrolling us. Now, on Tuesday night, I'm talking on Cuba, alongside, I think, the Cuban ambassador and other friends of mine. And that's also at 8 o'clock. So that's on Tuesday at 8 on Cuba, on Monday at 8 on Scotland. Here's poll 2. Now, don't let me down on this. This was my idea. Don't let me fall on my face. What is your favourite musical genre? Is it A, classical, B, rock and roll, C, jazz, or suggest your own in the comments section on my Twitter feed, reggae, rhythm and blues, whatever. You can put it in the comments section. Pop, my editor says. What's pop? What? Actually, it was the director. The editor is refusing to take responsibility for the word pop. I once went into a record shop and asked if they had Donovan's new single, and they made me say it. Not once, but twice. It was called Goo Goo Garabajak. I'm not joking. I'm not making that up. I twice had to repeat, I want Donovan's Goo Goo Garabajackal, or something like that. So what's your favourite musical genre? Classical, rock and roll, or jazz, or suggest your own in the comments section. Now, Ranjeet Brar, physician, surgeon, and now radio and television personality, has talked us through the entirety of this pandemic so far, and it's not showing any signs of dying down. As a matter of fact, in some places, in some countries, it's already on the spike. If indeed you can even call this a second wave. Maybe this is still the first wave. We better find out from the doctor. Dr. Ranjeet, thank you again for joining us. What would be your answer to that question? Is this a second wave or just a continuation of the first?
George, great to be back with you. It's a kind of almost an academic question. Definitions are fluid and keep changing. But probably we're still seeing the end, at least in Britain, of a first wave of infections. Obviously, we're well past our spike when we were having, as you said, on probably more than 20 consecutive days, more than 1,000 deaths per day in our country, a massive number, really. Right now, the rates are really low. If you're in the hospitals, the way we've worked has changed very much, but we're definitely not overwhelmed with cases, but our capacity is low because of the way we're working. But if you look at the number of deaths, it's really flat-lined. It's not gone away. We're consistently having several hundred, probably last week, 450 to 500 deaths again. Though there's been some argument about the way in which those deaths are recorded. We tend to see underreporting rather than overreporting. And again, if we go back to the true figures, we're acknowledging currently about 46,000 deaths in England in all settings in the official figures, but probably we're in excess of 70 if you look at excess mortality. And those numbers are keeping on going. They're not going away. And as we've said, as we come out of the period where we have summer, where we're able to maintain some kind of social distance, where we're packed together, where people anyway are a bit immunosuppressed when the weather starts to change, we're likely to see an increase in cases. And certainly if we look on the world stage, we're seeing unprecedented numbers right now. We're seeing on a daily basis more than a quarter, not quite a third, kind of 270, 280,000 cases per day. The United States is up to 16.3 million, still very much in the heart of their, USA is up to 4.3 million, in the heart of their first wave. And United States, India and Brazil together account for half of the world's cases. And we're seeing huge numbers, particularly in the United States, in 3 or 4 states. So initially started in Washington, but now, of course, we're seeing huge numbers in Florida, in Texas, and in California. So overall, on the world stage, we're very much in the first wave. In England, probably we're dying towards the end of our first wave, but very much not the end of this story, George. People are understandably tired of the story to an extent, but it's still having a massive impact on our lives. If we go out now this week, obviously the government have made it compulsory to wear masks in shops. And I think more and more people are doing so. A far higher percentage of the population than I've ever seen as I'm walking around are wearing masks out and about. And I think that's entirely reasonable and appropriate. The danger is still with us, George.
Yes, I was pleasantly surprised. Masks are now hegemonic. So much so the SNP have started to make them in SNP colours. Everyone is wearing a mask. Even in London today, where some predicted that it was only snowflakes that would be wearing masks, and so on, I was pleasantly surprised. Virtually everybody was wearing a mask. And that's only right, isn't it? I mean, I'm so old, I remember all of these same arguments against the mask being made when seatbelts were compulsory, made compulsory in cars, crash helmets made compulsory for motorcyclists. People are just being foolish by building this up into some kind of civil liberties issue. It's a public health issue, isn't it?
I think that's exactly right, George. It's a public health issue where it's common sense that we will reduce the rate of transmission by wearing masks. And even though it's not a perfect barrier, it reduces the number of large droplets and also the number of small droplets, the distance they travel, and therefore the likelihood of transmission. And that, on a population basis, has a large impact. So, yeah, very much worthwhile. And all the very spurious reasons I've seen, from the kind of psychological control to the will decrease your oxygenation and is some kind of threat to your respiration. Those are all, to me, totally spurious arguments, and certainly they're not backed up by any kind of evidence. There are still kind of interesting issues which are coming out about the coronavirus in terms of policy. I think the Institute for Public Policy Research published a report, which, whilst not rocket science, is a confirmation of the things that we've been saying all along. They pointed to the fact that, you know, Britain has one of the lowest rate of hospital beds in the world, in the developed world certainly, but kind of more comparable to India than to Japan or Korea, where they have 10 beds per 1,000 the population. We have less than 2. So they said that there was a vast undercapacity in our hospitals, which has made the pandemic worse. They said there was as a result, over occupancy. It's very often the case that you find the hospitals are fully occupied prior to the pandemic, and there's a kind of an alert system, a color-coded alert system, black watch, silver watch, platinum watch. There are all these kind of codes to indicate that actually there are no beds in the hospital, and they're desperately trying to discharge people from the hospital. So our occupancy rate is very often in excess of 95%, 97, 98% nationally, whereas they have suggested that to resist this kind of pandemic and to have resilience in the system, we should have an occupancy rate of about 85%. And in fact, that's what it used to be in the 80s, prior to a massive program of bed cutting. So, you know, not rocket science, George, but re-emphasizing the fact that this was a problem that was entirely made by our emphasis on what they call efficiency, but really is a process of reducing capacity in order to increase rationing and to push a policy that would enable and soften the NHS up for privatisation. So, interesting bit of research that's come out, or report rather, from the IPPR.
Very interesting. And of course, we need to add to the casualty list the people who have other illnesses, other complaints, who have died at home, who haven't even presented maybe to doctors or gone to hospitals. You know, I scold my children when they're climbing or doing something reckless, that, you know, if you break your leg here, there's no place in the hospital for you because of the coronavirus. I'm joking, of course, but the numbers of people who've died that might not otherwise have died because of the pressure of the virus on the NHS, they're also, in a sense, indirect victims of the virus.
They absolutely are, George. We've said before, we've got 10 million people waiting for hospital appointments and procedures in the NHS. It's absolute record numbers. And, you know, the hospitals, despite that, are almost eerily quiet at the moment. They're eerily quiet, partly because of the reduced capacity because of the way we're operating them, partly because people are desperate to stay away. They have seen what happened in the pandemic. Hospitals became a hotspot for transmission, and by early discharging, and you know, almost criminal policy of discharging patients with COVID from hospitals to nursing homes to increase capacity in what is, as we said, a system without capacity, a massive transfer into the most vulnerable places. So hospitals are becoming feared places. It's almost kind of medieval in our approach right now.
Like the old mental hospitals or mental homes bedlam and so on. That's I think, widely felt. Don't go near the hospital unless you're unconscious and you're being carted into it.
People are afraid to go, no question. And then people are coming if they absolutely have to. But then we're seeing late presentations of emergencies and therefore poor outcomes of those emergencies. And of course, then a larger number of people will not attend hospital and will have fatalities at home. And we don't know yet the true toll. But I can tell you that cancer services across the country are seeing far lower rates of referral, are able to deal with those referrals far slower. There were fewer procedures happening, and the incidence, the rate of those diseases will not have changed in the population. So, yeah, in addition to the toll taken by the coronavirus, there will be a far wider toll taken by the fact that, as we have said, in my opinion, the hospitals have been overwhelmed because they've been unable to cope with this. And again, that IPPR report essentially said it would have been far better, instead of spending that money, several billion on, well, they spent 3.2 billion on PPE. It's come out this week as well. It's a huge figure, very inefficiently spent, and still were unable to provide PPE because it wasn't brought at the right time and in a timely manner, and the wrong PPE brought. But equally, the policy to open up all the Nightingale hospitals, which we know were underused, was the wrong kind of spending at the wrong time, in the wrong place. There's been dramatic cuts in social care, so our ability to care for people in the community. There have been dramatic cuts in capacity, and really what was needed were centres where we could take people who had the virus and care for them in a situation where they were isolated from the community and isolated from the most vulnerable in our hospitals and elsewhere. And that's been obvious to us all the way through, George, but that's becoming increasingly the spoken of narrative, but in a way which is put across in a way that absolves any responsibility. This was just a kind of natural event that couldn't be avoided. And I disagree with that as well, because as we know, and as we've said before, Operation Cygnus was presided over by Jeremy Hunt, by essentially this Conservative government, certainly a lot of their colleagues. And in that context, they quite clearly saw that all their policies would lead to our inability to cope with the pandemic. Now, clearly they didn't know a pandemic was 2 years away, but pandemics are actually regular occurrences and a part of our planning. Should be a part of our planning, but they made the decision to bury that policy, to bury that report, not to make adequate preparations for this pandemic, quite deliberately, because it interfered with their general policy, which is one of privatisation of the National Health Service. George.
Dr. Ranjeet, thank you very much indeed. I fear you'll have to go on meeting me because this isn't going away anytime soon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. What is your favourite musical genre? Classical, 11% only. I speak as a double bass player myself in orchestral settings. B, rock and roll, 74%. I knew you were all rock and roll types. C, jazz, 15%. And 216 of you have voted so far. Lots and lots of different genres here. Stephen, for example, prefers post-romantic atonal expressionism. Don't we all? Let's hear from Chris in Colchester. Go ahead, Chris.
Hiya.
Hi.
Yeah, well, I just keep hearing an argument about seatbelts, but it's such a silly argument because there's decades of evidence to show that seatbelts work, whereas masks, there's conflicting studies from different health professionals.
Yeah, we can believe Chris in Colchester, or we can believe Dr. Ranjeet Brar. Which do you think I believe, Chris?
Well, let's talk about that, shall we? About the World Health Organization that changed their stance. They changed it through political. They changed it through political lobbying. Had nothing to do.
You've got such a poor view of doctors.
He's not. Another doctor would have a complete. Why don't you get Sunetra Gupta on? She's a top epidemiologist at Oxford who's basically been ignored. It's because you agree with him, you keep getting him back on. But he's a communist. He wants the
he's a communist? What does that have to do with whether masks work?
He wants the economy to fall apart. He's been cheering this on the whole time. Why are you personally attacking me?
Are you serious? He wants the economy to collapse. He's been cheering this on all along. Have they just let you out for the weekend?
Look at his Twitter thread. There's going to be 200 deaths through lockdown, which he supports and you support. If you saw the other day in the Telegraph, So don't make out this is... And the World Health Organization said Syria gassed babies. Do you agree with that, or were they lying then?
I'll tell you what, Chris. I think that Broadmoor should switch your radio off, because you have just provided a torrent of slander against a physician, a surgeon, a communist, you say, cheering on the COVID-19, you say, the World Health Organization, communist. Off you go, Chris. Get back to your padded cell. Sean is in Stevenage. Go ahead, Sean.
Hello, George. How come nearly every time I ring up, you're booting people off the line?
It's just bad luck, Sean.
I think it might be. Yeah, you've missed a section out of your music poll, the heavy metal rock and roll. That's what it should say.
I just knew that nobody with the good sense to listen to me would also listen to heavy metal.
Why not?
You're not a headbanger, are you?
I have been for quite a few decades, I'm afraid.
Really? I've just never gotten into that. Who's your tipple?
Nearly everybody from the Rolling Stones to Rammstein, but I mean...
But you wouldn't call the Rolling Stones heavy metal.
No, but
That's
they
rock
were
and roll.
They were the start of it, and I love everything
It's only
from
rock and roll, but
through.
I like it. I love the Rolling Stones.
Yeah. Everything, for anybody that picks a guitar up and makes a noise, does it for me.
They called it, when I was at school, they called it prog rock and progressive rock and so on. I never did get what was progressive about it. But people would walk around with albums under their arms from, Led Zeppelin and what was the other one that I'm thinking?
Deep Purple, Black Sabbath.
Deep Purple, Black Sabbath and others. They'll come back to me.
You clearly weren't in the right school with the right drugs, George.
Well, see, I've never even seen a drug, never mind taking one. I've led a sheltered life. I was at the barricades from the age of 15.
Wow.
Sean, go on.
I've had a misspent youth. I just want to caution people something Jared from Pennsylvania said about idiots not wearing masks. And just picking up something Dr. Brar said again. I love every time he's on your show.
He's wonderful,
We need to be a bit careful here. We need to be careful. There's a bit of a narrative being spun, I think, behind the scenes with the government starting to shift blame a little bit from themselves and their own totally inept performance, and they're to blame for why this virus has taken hold here in the UK. Don't go blaming people who aren't wearing masks for their ineptness. And there seems to be a narrative shift here, so the government can say, oh, look, we've had a second spike and it's all your fault for not wearing masks. When it comes to these masks, they're also insulting our intelligence. I've worked with filtration and filter systems. I've read some of the articles where masks are said not to be that good, and other articles recently where the science is saying they're effective, etc. There's an awful lot of data I could go into about filter size, filtration, whether it's micron or nanometers. Nanometers, you're talking the dimensions of the virions for this virus. There's flow rates, pressure rates, there's boundary layers going through pores, all sorts of things as to how and why a mask might be effective. But when I look and the BBC are telling people, you can make your own mask, and then you can go back into the shops wearing the mask and spend money and make us profits, or you can go to the pub or the restaurant, but don't wear a mask, because clearly you can't eat or drink through a mask, but spend money and make us profits. And you can go to work and work in a crowded workspace and wear this mask and make us profits. And what's this mask made of? Your old underpants. Basically, the government's trying to tell us, go back to work, go back to shopping, go back to spending money, and wear old underpants on your head. You'll be fine.
Well, that's very powerful and entirely logical. Of course, masks don't stop the virus. The virus is far smaller than the inevitable hole in any mask. What it does is inhibit the water, the saliva, the snot in which the virus is traveling. You will not sneeze on as many people. You will not cough on as many people.
Indeed, I would agree if that was the method of transmission, but we're being told it's aerosolized.
Well, but it can't be aerosolized until it gets into the air.
Yeah, and we're being told it potentially can hang around in the air. I remember back in March, somebody was saying it would hang around for 3 or 4 hours.
It's not a panacea, but it's neither is a crash helmet, neither is a seatbelt. But it's at least adding to your chances of not getting it.
But not when you cut up an old pair of underpants and put them on your head and wander around thinking you ain't going to infect people.
I wouldn't dream of any such thing.
If they were N95 masks, which I know we're keeping those back for the NHS, etc., if they're FFP3 or N95 masks and the government said we bought 120 million of them, you can all have 2 each, fine. I wouldn't be quibbling.
They've spent £3 billion on PPE. As Dr. Ranjeet pointed out, at the wrong time, with the wrong stuff, from the wrong people, and still there are people in the NHS that don't have it.
And that's disgraceful.
$3 billion.
And which makes me wonder what sort of quality of make and quality of build are the masks they're going to be dishing out to people.
Well, if you're a venture capitalist somewhere in the Tory party's pocket, you've got a fair chance of getting a contract.
Well, we spoke about this last week. They're dishing out contracts without tendering competition to all sorts of firms that have never had any experience in doing any of this. What sort of masks are they buying if that's what they're dipping into?
Yeah, well, I'm confident about my mask. I hope you are about yours, Sean. Many thanks indeed for a terrific and entertaining call. The poll is going interestingly. Classical is up too. You see, some people were quiet classical fans. They're just like a quiet Tory or a quiet Trump supporter. They didn't really want to own up. But it has gone up too to 14%. Rock and roll down 5. Down 5. That's at 69. Jazz is at 17, up 2. So you can also suggest your own in the comments section, of course, and I'd be delighted to read some out. Hazel loves folklore. Ben loves punk rock. Stephen, as I said, loves post-romantic atonal expressionism. Basil likes Pink Floyd. God rest Peter Reid. Was it Peter? Who's Peter? Who? Peter Green. Peter Reid was a footballer. Forgive me, Peter Reid, if you're listening. Peter Green. I remember him only for Albatross. Tom loves reggae. Craig says, I like music that sounds good. Kevin says, George, do you know Wiley? The only Wiley I know is Bob Wiley. Helen says, Hawaiian sack key music. Is that a thing? And on email, Rob says, I love George Galloway. He speaks the truth, the real truth of how imperialism has screwed this planet. Thank you, Rob. Alex says, I would like to see the 4 nations of the current UK as equal entities within a federation with the ability to set their own laws, economic, social and transport policies, but with a shared defence, currency and central bank. I believe national decisions are made in the respective capitals and not necessarily in London. And Andrew says Biden would win with Dolly Parton. Debbie says only an idiot would think a mask will suffocate a person. There's a few idiots around, Deb. And Neil says, try and say snowflake on a ventilator in an ICU ward. That's if you can get into an ICU ward and if they've got any spare ventilators. And JC says, masks work at reducing people's bad breath on other people, a gesture that is polite. And Bunny says, it sounds like fun in the studio. Indeed it is, and I hope you're having fun too, amidst all the serious issues that we're talking about. Let's hear from Jimmy in Melbourne, who's up very early in Australia. Jimmy, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, George.
Hi.
Look, the previous caller kind of much summed up what I was kind of going to get to. This particular and the mask ratings, well, it's hard to sort of say when you've got people that are just walking around and they've got a face covering, that whether or not it stops the virus. Well, yeah, who knows?
It doesn't
And at
stop
the same
it.
time-
It doesn't stop it, Jimmy. It just means there's less fluid coming out of your mouth.
Well, but there's fluid coming out. Well, say, for instance, if you're going to be coughing, wouldn't you say that you'd put your hand over your mouth and you'd cover it up? Yeah, that's just etiquette.
Yeah, of course it is.
You know
But
what I
then
mean?
your hand goes somewhere, doesn't it? Your hand
Yeah,
goes on
and then you wash your hands-
on a
and you
door
wash your
handle.
hands
Yeah, but
before
you
you
can't.
eat.
But you can't wash your hands if you're out. And if you're out, you're touching other people. Perhaps you're touching other surfaces. If you press, I no longer do, but the I don't know if you've got them in Australia, but these traffic signals. So you press if you want to cross. How many people have touched that? And how many people coughed in their hand before they did so? And so on. It's not a panacea, Jimmy. It's just giving yourself a wee bit of a break.
Well, look, I've been touching everything, and I'm still fine.
Well,
Yeah,
lucky
and
you,
I can't see myself
but
going,
Jared,
well, look,
Jared in Pennsylvania's old father is down with 106 temperature. The fact that you're fine,
Like I say
I'm
to my
fine
mum
too,
when
Jimmy.
I speak to her on the phone, George. When I speak to my mum on the phone, I'm just like, look, I would wear a mask if I was going to go and see her because she's elderly. You know, so if I was going to be around old people or people with that sort of, I suppose that disposition and that age, of course. Like when I was ever sick or I had a cold, I'd never go and visit my nana. Yeah, that's just
So
common sense.
you're not against masks in principle?
Well, yes, I'm not against masks if you're going to be around people where they're more vulnerable, 100%. Yeah, of course. But if you're just walking down the street and there's nobody around, I really cannot see the point in having to wear a mask.
Okay, Jimmy. Thanks very much indeed from Melbourne. Good morning to you. Let's take Rob in Merseyside on the care homes and COVID. Go ahead, Rob.
George, can you hear me okay? Good evening.
Good evening, sir. Yes, I hear you very well.
Thank you. Okay, I'll get straight to it. I think the way the government handled the care home situation insofar as they placed people that were otherwise healthy into care homes is a travesty.
Totally. Dr. Ranjeet was reluctant to call it a crime, but I will. It's criminal what happened in Scotland and in England in the sending of old people into care homes that should have been in hospital and the forbidding of old people in the care homes from going to hospital. I believe criminal charges will in the end have to be brought or should be.
Yeah, there will be a day of reckoning, hopefully, for those responsible for that.
Yeah.
And that's all really I had to say, to be honest.
It's a very fine point, and I'm glad. Have you avoided it yourself, Rob?
I've managed to, this far, and I'm mindful of those around me, and I'm just, I suppose I'm towing the line, for want of a better word. I'm not a big supporter of face masks. I mean, I wear one, but it's primarily not to antagonize the people that I'm around if I'm in a shop. So,
well, the shop workers have got to take every measure that they can, don't they? After all, they have no choice but to be breathed on by us because that's their job. And I think we should do everything that we can, even if it's a small reduction of risk. We should do everything that we can to avoid making them sick.
No, that's fair enough. I keep my distance, and I normally shop cashless. But we do live in strange times.
We do, my goodness, we do. Rob, thank you very much indeed for that call. Let's take a 60-second break. That's all. Stay tuned.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
comrade. Tired of being trapped in mainstream media? Join the revolution with mother of all talk shows. Has been instrumental in making brain and heart of people stronger, like kettlebell for mind. Don't be brainwashed, CC, an open mind to new way of thinking. If you don't know how, George will teach you. If you won't learn, he will make you. Speak to Comrade Galloway if you think you're hard enough on the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Very funny that was. Who's that Russian? Who's that Russian masquerading as a comrade? What's your favourite musical genre? Classical, 15%. Up 1. It's mounting. Rock and roll, 70%. Also up 1. And jazz, 15% down 2. I'm sorry to say. You can vote until the end of the show on my Twitter feed. Let me know, just so I get a better picture of who the audience are. Let's take a call from Daniel in Trieste, because we're on a world tour in Italy. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you, George. I wanted to talk about the coronavirus and particularly about masks, because I see that's a strong topic these days. I want to say that in Italy we wore masks. We wore them for a long time. We still wear them when we go into shops, and we didn't get out of our homes if we didn't have to. That lasted for 2 months. And police actually fined or even jailed you for not wearing a mask or being out for no reason. And yes, it was harsh, but it worked. I mean, of course, since we reopened, the numbers dropped less sharply, but at least it's much more manageable now. We never got to the point of having to refuse people to cure people in hospitals. So that was a good thing. And secondly, I was pleasantly surprised when the EU closed the borders to the US, because I was scared the US would bully us into keeping the borders open. So I'm thankful for that. And finally, if you allow me, about China, here in Italy, most people see China and Americans bashing each other over the virus, and there are fake news all the time, so it's hard for some to understand the truth. But we can believe what we see with our own eyes, and Italy was the first Western country to be hit with the virus, and China came to help right away, sending supplies and experts before the EU did anything to help us. So I'd say mostly we're grateful to China for that.
Daniel, that's the best call of the night. Thank you very much indeed. From Trieste, let's go to Cornwall, where Brian wants to talk about the same thing. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, yes, George. I think it's a good thing with these masks, when people wearing the masks and that, especially when you're out and about. I went to a place today, a shop today into South Ash, and everybody was wearing masks. Everybody, except for these four men, which didn't have the mask on. And when I said to them, "Why haven't you got the mask on?" they started talking their foreign language and looked at each other and laughed at them. So I said to the people, one of the store staff there, I said, "Why haven't they got the masks on then? You know, everybody had masks on." And they said, "We cannot police it. We've been told, the government's told them, they cannot make anybody wear the masks."
No, they can't make them, no. But the shops can make a rule, and anyone who breaks that rule can be asked to leave the shop. And if they don't leave it, then they can be guilty of a criminal offence.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, of course, there are lots of get-out clauses. If the mask is causing you distress and so on, then you've got an opt-out and so on. Nothing's perfect. It's not perfect. And the problem of the coronavirus in Britain is vastly more greater than the issue of masks, the care homes issue, the PPE issue, the failure to track and trace, the failure to stop flights coming in by the dozen every day from the worst affected places on the planet, the statistical inaccuracies, the deliberate suppression of death numbers over 20 days. 1,000 people died every day, but on not one of those days did the government admit that 1,000 people had died. They only admitted it later. The failure to prepare for such a pandemic, when their own exercise, Operation Signet, had told them exactly what would likely happen if Britain were to be hit by a pandemic such as we have been. All of these are vastly more important issues than masks. But we can't do anything about those right at this moment, although we must in time. But at this moment, Brian, we can reduce the chances of giving it to somebody just a little bit by wearing a mask. So why not wear one?
100%, George. George, I bought a box of masks. I bought a big box of masks. So I've got them in my car, I've got them in my truck. I've got the masks everywhere. So there's it's £10 for 50 masks. All right, £10 for a box of masks. If somebody can't spend £10 for a mask to go out shopping and do whatever they got to do to keep everybody out safe, we're lucky down here because it's been a month into Plymouth, the Derriford Hospital in Plymouth. There's no deaths of this COVID for 1 whole month solid. We're very, very lucky down here in the southwest. We haven't, especially in Cornwall, we haven't been hit. But with all the visitors coming down here and from all over the country, from all over the world, no doubt, we don't know what they've got. So the masks is better for us down here to keep us safe. I feel a lot safer going into a shop where everybody's got the masks on.
Yeah, I don't know about a lot, but we're definitely safer. Brian, thanks for that excellent call from Cornwall. Mark is in North Carolina, wants to talk about country music. Maybe he thinks I've misrepresented it. Let's find out. Mark, welcome.
Yeah, how's it going there, George? George, I was listening to that guy, but you got to realize, one man, it depends on what we mean by progressive. If you take like myself, I'm when it comes to economic issues, I'm left of Bernie Sanders. When it talks about imperialism, anti-imperialism, me and you are in the same boat. I think we should get all our troops out of the various parts of the world, and that's it. But then again, on social issues like, for instance, gun rights, I believe everybody has a right to have a gun. I believe, plain and simple. I think that's a natural right, and it goes with our Constitution here in the United States. And I think British people should have it also. So, it depends on what we mean by, and I'm against abortion, of course. But that's the thing. It depends on what we mean by progressive.
That's a very good point you're making, Mark. What is left? What is right? What is progressive? I mean, my views on abortion are the same as yours. I think even on gun rights, the same as yours. Am I therefore a reactionary? Am I therefore right-wing? If so, I don't want to be left-wing.
But some people you are. Not me.
But come back to country music. Did I misrepresent it?
Yeah, to a degree you did, because I don't know if I'm pretty sure you heard of Johnny Cash,
Of course. A great man, a great man.
Johnny Cash sung a lot about American Indians or Native Americans, what do you want to call them? Okay, including Ira Hayes, the great the Marine that unfortunately died in a drunken stupor in Arizona. He also about the various tribes, like the Seneca tribe, how they were screwed over by the government. They made a deal with George Washington, and they got screwed over. And plenty of others. And he himself, I believe, was part Native American. If you look at him, I'm pretty sure he was too. He's so. I mean, he was very progressive as far as that went. And to a degree, other country singers too, like Merle Haggard, could be. It depends on what he was singing about, But definitely Johnny Cash. So, I mean, you do have
brilliant point. Brilliant point. I'm cutting you short only because of the hour and because Shadow in Denver is on the line. Go ahead, Shadow.
Good afternoon, George.
Hi.
You are a national treasure, international treasure.
Thank you so much.
When we were listening to our progressive guest, Todd Barrow, it made me think of how desperately our country needs ranked choice voting, and how it is suppressed by both the Democrats and Republicans. I don't know if you have ranked choice voting.
No, we don't. We don't in the form that you are talking about. We have in certain elections, for the London mayoralty, for example. So I got 154,000 first or second preference votes for London mayor. The Scottish Parliament elections are also proportional to an extent, though not in the form that you're referring to, which is much more proportional. So you'd vote for Donald Trump 1, Joe Biden 2, you might write in Jesse Ventura 3, and so on. That's what you mean, yeah?
Yes, exactly. And, we just don't have enough awareness just because both parties are fighting against it. Maine is the only state that is actually successfully
But both your parties are two cheeks of the same ass.
They sure are. Yeah, I have way too much to complain about on your show, from the dollar and how it's not backed by anything anymore,
Anyway, I'll tell you what, Shadow, you're in one of the loveliest places on God's green earth. Denver, Colorado, one of the loveliest places I've ever been to. I spoke there some years ago now. Shadow, thank you very much for that call. As I say, the hour is against us, and we need to go to Oakland, California, where Jason is on the line. Jason, welcome.
All right. Hey, George, love this show. Thanks for
you.
everything, man. Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
I just wanted to talk. Yeah, I just wanted to talk because about actually it kind of connects with the last gentleman and how he spoke about, he's pro abortion and pro.
No, he was anti-abortion and pro-gun rights.
Or anti-abortion. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's what I meant. And basically, my point is that how in the United States, I know they do a lot in Western countries, period, is how the politicalization of literally every issue, gender, sex, it's always politicized in this country and even weaponized and used against the people, if you will. One point I wanted to quickly make is that with all of the protests and stuff, and like some of these protesters being demonized, whatnot, MLK was demonized. MLK was public enemy number one by the COINTELPRO. So it's just like, I feel like every issue gets weaponized, and that's kind of the downfall of the United States.
Well, not only the United States, everything in the West is sexualized or it's politicized. One's language is rigorously policed, especially on social media and so on. Things are branded what they were never intended to be. Things are called hate speech that are merely disagreement, albeit sometimes vehement disagreement. It's a Western vice. It's a first world problem, Jason.
Absolutely. I also think that because of that, we think that there's this idea of freedom and being able to do whatever we want, whatnot, or not just freedom, period. But I think it's kind of like a joke. And because of that, that's the reason why that people are like, oh, you're infringing on my rights by making me wear a mask and all this stuff. The whole idea of freedom pretty much kind of like, it's what's making, this place fall apart. Everyone thinks, oh, yeah, I have the ability to do what I want. You're stepping on my rights. But it's a joke.
Yeah, Jason, in the words of Janis Joplin, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Me and Bobby McGee, thanks for that wonderful call. Julie says, Jimmy, it's masket or casket. That's a good one. Masket or the casket. And Teresa says, God bless all of you who are suffering from all this mayhem and chaos and planned carnage. And Richard says, there's music, then there's Bob Marley. And Lucchesi says, if you think about it, there are also opportunities to create new, possibly temporary occupations to solve the COVID situation. And James on YouTube says, Sunday night is piano practice for me. I'm learning. What a wonderful world, with George and guests rapping over my playing. It's rather surreal. I'm renaming the song, What a Woeful World. That's brilliant, James. And Connor says, Boris and his chums are trying to destroy the NHS through inefficiency. And Steve says, George, any recordings of your bass playing? Would like to hear. No, because I was a child at the time and recording didn't really exist. I played in the Dundee Schools Orchestra, the St. Cecilia Orchestra, and I can still play a bit, but no recordings. No, I'm more a singer these days. Now, clear the decks. The legend that is Norma in Bristol is on the line. Norma, welcome.
Hello. I never seem to stick to the subject, although
that's all right.
I did think that Todd Barrow, the country and western man, was a bit disappointing, really.
Well, maybe I was a bit cruel to him. I'm hoping he doesn't think that, because he was kind enough to come on. He just wasn't quite billed. He wasn't quite as he was billed to me.
No.
I'm going to inquire afterwards whether there's any payola involved here.
Anyway, what I was just going to say was, we recently celebrated, well, some people celebrated, obviously, VE Day, 75 years.
Yes, of course.
And on August the 6th, now, this coming up, it's 75 years since the first nuclear bomb was dropped on Hiroshima.
In August, yeah.
Yeah, and in Nagasaki. I mean, it caused thousands of civilian deaths. And the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament is organising lots of information about this around the country, because so much money spent on these weapons of mass destruction, really. I just think hopefully one day perhaps our country will wake up and say never again, you know.
Well, I'll tell you what, we will cover that here on the Mother of All Talk Shows, the 75th anniversary, absolutely, certainly. Norma, the hour is against us. I hope you're well, and your husband too.
Thank you, yes.
God bless you. We can't have a show without you, Norma. Please never forget that. And follow Norma on Twitter. She's Fagash Flo. She does smoke a wee bit, and sometimes she coughs on the line. But we wish her long life and prosperity and health. Norma, thank you very much indeed. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. Let me give you the musical genre poll. Classical went up too again, up to 18%. See, we've got a reasonably highbrow audience on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Rock and roll, 67%, down 2%. I wonder if people just voted for rock and roll because they felt expected to. Jazz is disappointing at 15%. The poll is now closed, I think. Thank you very much for participating in it. Don't forget, you can hear me tomorrow night at 8 o'clock on Scotland, on my Facebook page, on my YouTube channel, and on Twitter, on the account of Alliance for Unity, Alliance for Unity. And you can hear me on Tuesday night with the Cuban ambassador talking about Cuba. It's been a good show. I hope you agree tonight. And we've covered everything from rock and roll and my double bass playing and we've been everywhere, from Trieste to Denver, Colorado, to Oakland, California, and many other parts of the world. We were in Melbourne. We were in both the Carolinas, North and South. We were in Texas, and so on. So it's all evidence that this is indeed a global university of the airwaves. And it cost you absolutely nothing. You didn't even have to listen to a commercial, to an advertisement. It cost you nothing. you gain something from it, as I did myself. So if you liked it, tell somebody else and bring another viewer and listener with you. I've been George Galloway, you've been a wonderful audience, and this has been the mother of all talk shows.